The Commons will debate a windfall tax on energy companies as the boss of the Bank of England warns of apocalyptic food prices.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock on Tuesday the 17th of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Paul. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
Yeah, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak will face the House of Commons today as it debates the cost of living crisis. Labour is expected to use the debate to force a vote on a windfall tax that it says could give struggling families £600 a year.
Well, that comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, blamed the war in Ukraine for the highest inflation in decades and warned that apocalyptic food prices could be devastating for the poor.
More than 260 Ukrainian soldiers have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, many to Russian-controlled areas. It will likely mark the end of one of the longest battles of the Ukraine war so far.
And Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall will fly to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Tour. The Prince of Wales's visit is part of a series of trips by senior royals to Commonwealth countries on behalf of the monarch.
Remember, you can join in any of our discussions throughout the morning by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us @gbnews.
Don't forget, you can also subscribe to the GB News channel on YouTube to get all the latest on the big stories that everyone is talking about.
But we start with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak facing Parliament today as the Commons debates tackling the short-term and long-term cost of living increases.
It's part of the Queen's speech debate, and Labour is expected to use it to force a vote on a windfall tax on energy companies that they say could give struggling families as much as £600.
Comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, told the Treasury Select Committee that apocalyptic food prices could have a disastrous impact on the poor. He also said that the war in Ukraine was to blame for the worst inflation in 3 decades.
Well, the debate in the Commons on the cost of living comes in the wake of controversial comments by Tory Minister Rachel Maclean yesterday, who suggested that people could protect themselves from the cost of living crisis by working more hours or moving to a higher paid job. Here's how she responded when we asked her about those comments on this programme yesterday.
Remarks that I made about people taking on more hours are part of our plan to help people get back into work. We've got a very good record of helping people get back into work after the COVID crisis, and also to enable them to, if they want to, and it's right for them, to increase their skills.
Joining us now is Victoria Hewson. She's the head of regulatory affairs at the IEA. That's a free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Victoria, welcome to the programme this morning. First of all, this windfall tax, we've heard a lot about it. What are the maths on it? Would it raise enough, that £600 figure a year that Labour are saying it could take off household energy bills? What are the maths on that?
I'm very sceptical about the £600 figure. That feels a little bit too convenient. And in reality, I doubt if a windfall tax would raise that much and then be redistributed in that way, which would be a very inefficient way of doing it, and likely, the administration skims off a bit, and no doubt they would want to put a bit towards net zero projects and all that kind of thing. So I am sceptical about the £600. And then also, this feels like a knee-jerk reaction, quite an opportunistic sort of cause for Labour to get onto. And actually likely to have quite negative longer-term effects, deterring investment in the kind of, energy diversity that we need to stop energy price rises in the future, not just on a one-off basis.
Yeah, look, the subject of windfall tax is going to be a big one throughout the programme this morning, and lots of the arguments on both sides sort of thrashed out. But I want to talk to you about the Governor of the Bank of England yesterday, using the sort of language us journalists like to use all the time, apocalyptic, further concerns of increased inflation. I mean, unbelievable phrases coming out of him yesterday, and reiterating that controversial comment about people not asking for price rises. A sign of the times?
Well, I just find it remarkable that the government...
Pay rises, sorry, price rises.
Yeah, none of us want price rises. Of course, we all want pay rises. I find it remarkable that the Governor of the Bank of England can sort of talk about all of this as if he's just some sort of neutral third-party observer. Controlling the money supply with a view to targeting inflation is literally his job.
So you think he could do more?
Well, I think they could have been doing more these past several years when economists like my colleagues at the Institute of Economic Affairs have been warning that inflation was in danger of coming roaring back. And yet instead we've just been pumping more money into the economy without accompanying supply side and productivity reform. So unfortunately, if the governor of the Bank of England couldn't see this coming, perhaps he's not doing his job very well.
But just to be clear on that, so you're saying that for the past few years, the Bank of England should have been printing less money, or do you think they should have been raising interest rates earlier?
Well, I'm not a monetary specialist, so you've slightly got me outside of my core expertise here, but I definitely think that we should have been more conscious of the long-term impacts of years of quantitative easing, followed by, obviously, all the stimulus that followed the pandemic, which undoubtedly was probably the right thing to do at the time. But we can't then sort of throw our hands up in shock and surprise when it has these consequences.
Although, in his defence, and he made this case yesterday, he claims 80% of the factors affecting inflation are external, are foreign.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he?
So you don't accept that then? Because obviously we look to China, they're still very much facing problems with COVID, with lockdown, supply chain. We look at what's happening with Ukraine and also in Russia itself. I mean, undoubtedly, global challenges.
No, undoubtedly, that's correct. And lots of countries are seeing the same across the EU and in the United States, possibly even more so, actually, in the United States, where they've had even bigger multi-trillion-dollar stimulus injected into their economy. But also, other economies with arguably more well-managed monetary policy like Switzerland have still got very low inflation.
Right, so what would you like to see done now? Is it too late? As you say, we've missed those opportunities up until now. Is there anything that the governor of the Bank of England could be doing? Or does it fall on the government? Because is it all, the responsibility of the governor? I mean, lots of people are saying that the government aren't actually doing an awful lot to help people in this crisis by raising taxes and national insurance, whatever else it might be.
And it could be, a lot of people saying cut VAT on fuel, cut the green levies on bills, stuff like that.
Yes, all of that, to both, help people reduce their outgoings by cutting the cost of essential things like energy. We could be tackling food prices by, cutting tariffs on imports of food, which would help in a small way. Longer term reforms, a huge part of the increase in living costs is things like rent. Reforming the property market, which I'm afraid the government has been ducking out of these past several years, could make a huge impact.
But reforming the property market takes time, and people are literally living day to day at the moment, so you need quick solutions.
Well, we need to, also increase productivity. So pay rises will be backed by productivity increases, and that's how you get inflation under control.
Oh, right. Well, it's a lot for us all to be getting our head round this early in the morning. Lovely to see you, Victoria Hewson from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you very much for coming in.
Yeah, some really interesting political choices that the government have to make. There are options. Do let us know what you think they should do. Should they cut the green levy on bills? Should they cut VAT on fuel? Will this windfall tax be enough? GBViews at gbnews.uk.
And, of course, what did you make of those comments from the Governor of the Bank of England yesterday? Does that really, add salt to the wound for many people? Let us know your thoughts. As Paul was saying, the usual ways, do get in touch. Yeah, 6:08. We're going to look at the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall travelling to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee tour. Well, our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, is travelling to Canada for the tour and sent us a sneak preview of what we can expect.
The next generation of Canadians proudly waved their national flag, welcoming Charles and Camilla to their High Commission ahead of the royal tour. These are the children many fear who'll have to live with the consequences of climate change. The Prince of Wales believes we need to take better care of our planet, and his status as heir to the throne, Canada's High Commissioner to Britain believes, can champion change.
Prince Charles plays an important role in the world in catalyzing action around climate change. He can be very influential in getting governments and businesses focused and committed.
Parts of Canada's northwest are experiencing heavy flooding for a second year in a row, and Prince Charles and Camilla will hear firsthand how it's impacting Indigenous communities. The royal couple will travel more than 2,000 miles across the country, also spending time in Newfoundland and the country's capital, Ottawa. But Canada's past could come back to haunt them. Protesters toppled statues of Her Majesty the Queen and Queen Victoria last year over the discovery of unmarked graves of Indigenous children who were sent to residential schools in the 19th and 20th centuries. Meeting members of the Indigenous community will form a big part of the visit, perhaps with a view to avoid similar protests experienced by other members of the royal family on recent tours to the Caribbean. The Queen hasn't visited Canada since 2010. Problems with her movement means Charles is having to take on more of her workload. Richard Bethelson, who's helped organise past royal tours of Canada, suggests Charles should use this opportunity to connect with Canadians.
There is an ongoing kind of debate that's growing about the future of the monarchy as we do approach the end of this reign. People will be looking at Prince Charles and I think really assessing whether they can see him as the next King of Canada.
Prince Charles's great-grandfather, King George V, officially opened Canada House in London almost 100 years ago. It serves as a unique showcase for Canada's culture. The royal couple's visit to the Canadian High Commission was about celebrating Canadians in Britain. This week's trip is about celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in a country that shares her crown. Cameron Walker, GB News, London.
Well, we're joined in the studio by the royal broadcaster and commentator and friend of the show, I should add, Rafe Hadel-Mancu. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Do you think there'll be some trepidation for Prince of Wales as he sets off on this tour, given that there has been a slight change in mood towards the royals in recent weeks, particularly within the Commonwealth?
Yes, I think on the back of the visits to the Caribbean of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and also given what we've seen in Canada over the past year or two in regards to the treatment of the Indigenous people, and we've seen the toppling of statues of kings and queens of Canada and the setting alight of churches by Indigenous people, I think there's going to be a certain degree of trepidation. But this is a very limited trip. This is only 3 days. This is the shortest trip, this and the last one, under the Trudeau government than we've ever seen before. Normally the royal family would come for a week, sometimes even 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks in terms of Charles in 1983 with Diana. So this is a very limited visit, and so there won't be many opportunities for public protest.
Why is that? Why such a short trip? Is it simply a case of a crammed diary?
No, I think it's much more of a case of the current Liberal government in Canada not being very keen on the monarchy. Right. You've seen a very, very reduced celebration for the Platinum Jubilee compared to the Diamond Jubilee. For example, Canada has always issued Jubilee medals and coronation medals, and this is the first time in history that Canada isn't issuing a Platinum Jubilee medal, despite protests from the opposition. And on the provincial level, they're now having their own medals done in protest at what Trudeau has done, which I think is a bit of a slap in the face to the monarchy, really.
I was in Canada a few years ago, just after Canada Day, and this was the event that really launched Kate onto the world stage, and she did so well. I mean, all the publicity was so positive, and Canada fell in love with her overnight. The mood has changed since then. Do you think that they would be receiving the same sort of antipathy almost if they were doing this visit today, and even if the Queen was going?
Well, I have to say, people in this country, I don't think understand how important Canada is to the monarchy. It's the country that they have visited more than any other country in the world. They have a very strong connection with it. And the Queen Mother, we know, regarded Canada as her favourite realm. I wouldn't be surprised if Prince Charles and the Queen felt the same way. And it has a very important role to play for Kate and for William, because in 1998, a year after his mother died, he was 16, he arrived in Canada, and Will's mania engulfed the world. All of these thousands of screaming girls arrived there. And then again, just after the royal wedding, Kate was in Canada for Canada Day, their biggest celebration, and that was her grand arrival in front of a crowd of hundreds of thousands. So there's a very special place there. We won't see that sort of degree of elation. It's amazing, only 10 years have passed, how things have changed. But of course, there's still a huge amount of love and interest in William and Kate, less so for the for the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, unfortunately, and that's because every time they go to North America, the North American media immediately raise Diana. In this country, we've gotten over the Diana issue, but a quarter of a century after her death, Diana's shadow looms heavy over the Duchess of Cornwall.
So do you think it's possible they can turn around that kind of opinion of the royal family over there that's sliding? Is it possible to arrest that?
Well, it's remarkable, isn't it? It's all about exposure. And they only visit Canada at the request of the Canadian government. So this isn't a jolly by the British government or by the monarchy. This is by invitation. That's why it's telling us only 3 days. And if the Canadians don't get to see the future King and Queen of Canada, how can they develop those bonds of affection and actually understand what they're doing? And it's so ironic that support for the Prince of Wales is so low in Canada, because all of the issues he has championed for the last 30, 40, 50 years are exactly at the core of the new Liberal Trudeau government's policies: diversity, interfaith dialogue, understanding the importance of communing with Indigenous peoples. All of these issues seem to be right at the heart of what Canada's all about, and yet that message hasn't gotten through because of this media's obsession about an event 25 years ago.
But, of course, whilst they're on this tour, it won't be just Canadians who will be looking at him, assessing him, thinking about how they feel towards him. It will be us as well, looking at him in the wake of just last week when he was opening Parliament formally. We're looking at him, aren't we now, thinking he's going to be king soon, and do we like him? What sort of reception will he receive? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment, but it has to be said. I would rather have the Prince of Wales than a playboy prince who just goes off and enjoys himself. He has actually committed himself for decade after decade to championing causes close to his heart. Now, I and many of our viewers may disagree about some of those issues that he's championing, but no one can deny his dedication to this country and to the Commonwealth. And I think it's absolutely well-deserved that he succeed his mother, because his life has been devoted to this country.
So really only a change of government in Canada, potentially a more pro-monarchy government that issues a longer invitation and a more frequent invitation would afford the royal family more of an opportunity to promote itself.
Exactly. The contrast between the Stephen Harper government that preceded Trudeau's government couldn't be more stark. It's black and white. They rolled out the red carpet, quite literally. They had a wonderful programme of celebrations for the Diamond Jubilee, and it's just unfortunate that we have to have Justin Trudeau in power now during this important Platinum Jubilee year, when he's very keen on having photo opportunities with the Queen, when he can bask in her glory for its PR purposes, but when it comes to actually educating people about the role of the monarchy in Canada, well, he's not interested.
We should state you are partly Canadian, aren't you? So you have an expertise in this field as well. Always lovely to see you, Rafe Hadelmanku. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, you're watching GB News Breakfast. Good to have you with us. If you want to feed back to us on the Royal Tour of Canada, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Coming up, we'll have much more on the cost of living crisis and how it affects people around the country. But first, let's find out the weather this Tuesday morning.
It's going to be scorchio.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Pretty warm one for some of us today, likely to be the warmest day of the year so far. Across parts of eastern England, 26, maybe 27 degrees Celsius. Further west, things are not so straightforward. Low pressure is here and this weather front is slowly trickling in. That's going to bring some clouds and some outbreaks of rain at times to Northern Ireland, westernmost fringes of Wales, and later on today, western Scotland and the far southwest of England. Quite misty and murky around the coast of northeast Scotland, and again here it's going to suppress the temperatures, but for many places it's dry and fine, hazy sunshine, and it is warm out there as well. Temperatures ticking up steadily through the day, so across the Midlands to eastern England, 23 in Hull and Birmingham, 26 in London, maybe 27 in one or two locations, whereas Belfast 15 or 16 with the cloud and the rain moving in here, which could be quite heavy this evening across western areas. At the same time, the warmth and humidity over France could trigger some thunderstorms which may drift northwards across East Anglia and the southeast. So potential for some quite heavy rain during this evening. But it does all tend to scoot away, and most places, again, become dry through the early hours. Temperatures holding up in double figures in most towns and cities. And again, Wednesday will, by and large, be a fine day. There will, again, be a bit of mist here and there early on, and there will be a few showers to come in, particularly parts of western Scotland. But a brighter day for Northern Ireland and West Wales. Again, quite breezy, but generally another fine warm day. Perhaps not quite as warm as today, but we should still get temperatures quite widely over 20 Celsius across England and Wales, and a warmer day for Northern Ireland, as I mentioned, probably 24, 25 the peak. However, further south, again, the potential for some thunderstorms through Wednesday evening. Some heavy downpours are possible across parts of England. We'll be keeping a close eye on that.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Still to come on this morning's programme. In 20 minutes' time, we'll be catching up with our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, about the cost of living crisis that is so key at the moment. This is off the back of that Bank of England Treasury Select Committee appearance yesterday, with Andrew Bailey giving an apocalyptic forecast over soaring food costs. Yeah, looking forward to that. Liam knows his stuff, of course. Also, today is the country's first active male professional footballer comes out as gay. We'll speak to a sports broadcaster who came out in 2014 and says Jake Daniels' courage will change football for the better. All that coming up in around about an hour's time. And remember, do get in touch. We love to hear from you on any of the big topics of the day. GBnews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. And Paul, some have already been coming in. Yeah, Jim says this is on the cost of living. I regret voting Tory ever. This current cabinet are dogmatic and inept. There should be a windfall tax and ending foreign aid. We are borrowing money to give it away, says Jim. Archie says, I don't know what the government's waiting for. We all know things are going to get worse, not better. Why wait till October? We need help now. Tanya in New Forest, the government should let anyone who gets a second job in either hospitality, farming or food production be tax-free. And Twitter user JT says, hardly knee-jerk when we've known about this price increase for months. The government implemented their policy on the 3rd of February, which is to loan us £200. A lot of people saying that isn't sufficient help from the government. Keep those thoughts coming in. We love to hear from you. Yeah, it is 23 minutes past 6. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening in the world this Tuesday morning. More than 260 Ukrainian servicemen have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister Anna Malyar says 53 are injured and were taken to hospital. All of the evacuees will be subject to an exchange. The Foreign Secretary is set to announce plans to rip up parts of the UK's post-Brexit trade deal on Northern Ireland. Liz Truss is expected to announce bringing forward legislation in the Commons today. It's in an attempt to restore power sharing in Stormont. The row over Northern Ireland's protocol has created an impasse in efforts to form a new executive in the region, with the DUP refusing to join a devolved government. The libel trial, brought forward by Rebecca Vardy against Colleen Rooney, which has been branded Wagatha Christie, has entered its final few days. Miss Rooney finished giving evidence yesterday and described messages between Miss Vardy and her agent as just evil. She claims the pair leaked false stories about her private life to the press, which Miss Vardy denies. The case continues today at the Royal Courts of Justice in London. Now, we've been leafing through the papers this morning, looking out for any topics that might provoke some debate and discussion, and this one leapt out of the pages, didn't it, Paul? Quarter of us prefer pets to our partners. Is that you?
Yeah, no. Although,
yes, you said.
Although, to be fair, my fiancé says sometimes I think you love the dog more than me or more than us.
What's your dog called?
But he's called Rocky.
Oh, there he is. He's gorgeous.
Go.
What type of dog?
You can see he's a Rottweiler.
Oh.
There he is. Yeah, he thinks he's a Rottweiler.
Yeah, the radio listeners don't know what.
Yeah, radio listeners don't know. Yeah, yes, he's a long-haired Chihuahua. He's about the size of a terrier, so he's not quite a handbag dog, more a sports bag dog.
A sports bag. Oh, you don't know how big my handbag is.
Yeah.
To be fair, well, look, you can see that picture if you want to on the GB News app. And you know, I think there was something in this. Eamonn definitely loves Maggie quite a lot, quite ardently, I would say. Ruth might have an opinion on that if she's watching. And I would say my dad possibly prefers his cat to his grandchildren.
Really? What makes you think that?
They don't answer back. They don't make a mess. They don't criticise. Not that my kids criticise.
Well, true. Cats tend not to make a mess if they're properly trained.
They're just adorable. I mean, I can't wait to get a cat. That is my next ambition in life. But not more than my partner. That's not fair.
Yeah, this nationwide poll, it says, of 1,500 people, also says 3 in 10 value their feline or canine companion more than their best friend. Over half reckon they have more photographs of their beloved pets than their family on their phone. So, interested to know whether you agree with this survey or not. Does that sound like you at home? Yeah. Also interesting to know, and not just dogs or cats, other maybe slightly more random pets, like your goldfish.
Oh, I've got goldfish.
Some people have. You have goldfish?
Well, my husband has goldfish. I didn't. I don't have anything to do with that.
They specifically belong to your husband?
Well, I didn't want them, so I said, if you're going to have fish, you're cleaning the tank, you're feeding them, I'm not involved.
Yeah.
I mean like that.
But you know what? The love that some of us have for our animals is
it's
incredible.
It's a British thing, and I'm almost afraid to say it, but send us your pictures of your... If you are one of those people that loves your pet more than your partner, send us your pictures, just like Paul's, and we'll try and get some of those on air if we can. I think I'm going to regret that, aren't I?
Yeah, just to be clear, I do not love my pet more than my partner, although sometimes I understand it may feel like that at home. I do get that. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I think the evidence says otherwise. But anyway, look, we'll bring some pictures to you just as soon as we can and they start coming in. But for now, we're going to talk about a UK debt help charity. It's warning that the rising cost of living is taking a devastating toll on people's mental health. Yeah, figures from the charity Christians Against Poverty show that before seeking free debt help, 60% of their clients felt often always lonely. That's a 10% increase since restrictions eased. Our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley has this report.
After losing his factory job during the pandemic, Graham Ashley Sr.'s finances began to spiral. He couldn't afford to pay his bills and was plunged into £13,000 of debt and forced to live off food banks. Christians Against Poverty helped Graham access relief to wipe his debt, but his lack of funds have taken a serious toll on his mental health.
I've spent a lot of time just on my own and crying. And I'm not talking, like 5 minutes, I'm talking really crying and just not knowing where to turn. And it hasn't helped with the budget food that I've been having to buy. I've piled a lot of weight on, and that's at the moment stopping me going out. I'm embarrassed by my appearance.
And now with the rising costs of living, Graham is on an even tighter budget.
The rise on the prepayment meters has meant that, I have been washing daily, but today is the first time in 3 weeks that I've had a shower. You have to save money on the gas. And as far as the electric goes, I've just been, if I cook a meal, I've been cooking a quantity that will do me for 3 meals, so I'm not needlessly burning electric again and again and again. And, yeah.
Christians Against Poverty Debt Centre manager Louise Foster helped Graham to sort out his finances.
Well, it's a really worrying time for lots of people. Debt's always been around there. I've been doing this now for 5 years, but we're seeing a big increase in people obviously affected by debt. We've got statistics that say that 60% of people are feeling lonely because of debt, despite coming out of lockdowns. That's an increase of over 10%. There's a lot of calls coming in where the people have actually got so low they're considering and feeling suicidal. So yeah, really, really worried about obviously the real increase in fuel prices because they don't have any other means of cutting back. They've already cut back as much as they can, and there really are a lot of anxiety and not, knowing what to do and where to turn next.
Charities like Christians Against Poverty are encouraging those in debt to reach out for support with the cost of living increasing. Anna Riley, GB News, Bradford.
Really difficult time for millions of people across the country at the moment. And for anyone struggling with debt, if that sounds like you, Christians Against Poverty can be contacted for free advice on 0800 328 00.
Yeah, and we will be talking to a doctor later on in the programme about not only the health impact of the cost of living crisis, but the mental health implications as well. So stay tuned for that a little bit later on in the show. As predicted, the inbox has gone bananas.
Yeah.
And my Twitter. So keep them coming. Somebody in the team behind will pilfer through and find the best ones. But my goodness me, I'm just watching them. Explosion of cat and dog pictures.
This is a survey of 1,500 people that says a quarter of us prefer pets to our partners. So we're basically asking, how much do you love your
I'd
pet?
say 100% of those emailing in agree with that.
Yeah.
Stay with us, though. We're taking you through the papers in just a moment. Today, we're joined by Martin Daubney and Amy Cameron. They'll be back in a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Good to have you with us. It is 6:33. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening this morning.
The Foreign Secretary is set to announce plans to rip up parts of the UK's post-Brexit trade deal on Northern Ireland. Liz Truss is expected to announce bringing forward legislation in the Commons today. It's in an attempt to restore power sharing in Stormont. The row over the Northern Ireland Protocol has created an impasse in efforts to form a new executive in the region, with the DUP refusing to join a devolved government.
More than half of people across the UK say their health is getting worse because of the rising cost of living. A YouGov poll shows 84% said their health is getting worse due to increasing heating costs, and 78% cited the rising cost of food. 1 in 4 had been told by a doctor that stress is a driving factor of their ill health.
The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will reflect on victims of a school scandal in Canada when their tour of the nation begins. It kicks off a 3-day trip around the Commonwealth country as part of Canada's Platinum Jubilee celebrations.
An LGBTQ plus football fan said they can't stop smiling after a Blackpool player became the first professional in the men's game to come out as gay in 30 years. Co-chair of Pride in Football, Joe White, has called it wonderful. 17-year-old Jake Daniels released a statement yesterday to say he's always known he's gay. He's the first UK male professional footballer to come out since Justin Fashanu in 1990.
Well, it's time to go through the papers this morning. We're joined by the Deputy Leader of the Reclaim Party, Martin Daubney, and environmental campaigner Amy Cameron. A very warm welcome to both of you. Nice to see you. Martin, let's start with you. The front of the Mail reflecting on these apocalyptic warnings from Andrew Bailey yesterday from the Bank of England, saying that families are really about to face a big challenge.
Yeah, we're well used to Bank of England governors being prophets of doom, aren't we? I mean, Mark Carney talked about Brexit as being the end of the world as we knew it constantly. In fact, every time he opened his mouth, the FTSE wobbled. And surely it's the Bank of England governor's job not to spread huge panic in the markets. But Andrew Bailey, the new governor, bad news Bailey is going to be called soon, no doubt. Let's talk about apocalyptic food prices really revving up this kind of sense of catastrophe. I think the media in particular thrives on everything has to be a disaster. And more to the point, I think the Bank of England and the government need to take some ownership of this situation, because it's all right for them to blame the war in Ukraine. But what about the £70 billion of furlough money they printed? I'm no Bank of England governor, but I know that inflation is driven by printing loads of money. So they themselves have their fingerprints on this. We're £410 billion worse off thanks to the self-inflicted economic catastrophe of the pandemic. And that's £6,000 for every British household. And so I think it's a bit rich of the Bank of England to sort of start blaming Ukraine when actually they've kind of mismanaged their economy themselves. And surely, more to the point, it's the Bank of England governor's job to steady the ship and be the voice of reason.
What would you like him to have said? Because obviously, you know, looking back, you can obviously critique what's happened up until now. But, you know, what would you like to hear from him?
We need tax cuts.
Well, that's not up to Andrew Bailey.
No, but he could suggest a positive solution is of easing the tax burden on the consumer, and the government might follow suit, rather than saying it's the apocalypse, that's the end of it. I just think they need to be more measured in their tone and, more to the point, take ownership of the fact that a lot of this is self-induced harm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the language surprised everyone for sure, didn't it, Amy? But we're going to hear from the Chancellor today. We're being told constantly, aren't we, that we're not going to get an emergency budget. But there is this call, Labour forcing this emergency vote today on windfall taxes. The Mirror claiming that that's going to raise £600 for families. But we just interviewed a lady from the Institute of Economic Affairs saying she's highly sceptical that that would be handed on to families. What's your view?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we appear to currently have a government that's out of ideas after doing absolutely nothing, largely, on the cost of living crisis. I think there are multiple calls coming from really all sides of the aisle for immediate and effective support that the government could implement. I totally don't disagree with you, actually, for a change, Martin, that the government and the Bank of England need to take a bit more ownership of this situation and take action to address not just an apocalyptic future, but an apocalyptic present for many families. We've already heard in the headlines that multiple families are already seeing an effect on their health, mental and physical, on current cost of food is already crippling people. So I think the calls for a windfall tax are absolutely justified. I think there probably are questions about exactly how much of that will be passed through to consumers. I would hope that's maximised. We also need to be talking about a benefits uplift, because what we are seeing right now is that those with the absolute least to play with are being left completely out on a limb. So we know that benefits increases are not keeping up with the pace of inflation, and that leaves our most vulnerable families completely exposed.
Yeah, but benefits uplift and a windfall tax. What else? What about the tax cuts that Martin mentioned, such as cutting VAT, green levies on bills, that kind of thing?
So I wouldn't disagree with potentially cutting VAT on energy. I think that the impacts of that are relatively small, but I think we are in extraordinary times. I would, unsurprisingly, possibly disagree with some of the green tax changes, although I don't disagree...
Even if temporary?
So what I wouldn't actually disagree with is the moving of some of the green levies off from bills onto general taxation. That would be a much more progressive way to deal with that. Much of those costs are actually associated with upgrading homes of pensioners, for example. So some of those costs are actually already being put to bear on the challenges that lots of people are facing in incredibly cold homes. I do think applying them on bills is not the right way to go, because we know, we saw Martin Lewis speaking about this yesterday, that actually those who use the least energy pay the most per unit cost, and that does need to be addressed.
A windfall tax is a typical short-term solution to a longer-term problem, and it won't solve the issue. It will raise a fraction of what's required. And in actual fact, I think Rishi Sunak is right to say the greater stimulus is to say to these energy companies, rather than, we're not going to take your money, but start investing more in British jobs, start investing more in British power bases, like BP with its offshore wind plants. Yeah, put the money in, otherwise we will come for you as a tax. But this constant obsession with taxing more used to be a problem of the political left, and now the Tories are just as guilty.
Well, it's strange that politically he hasn't gone for that tax cutting, given that he says he's a big fan of cutting taxes, and he's had a lot of criticism with the amount of tax that he's raised, you know, the highest tax burden
saving
since
it all
the
up.
50s.
I mean, sometimes it feels like we voted for Boris and we got Corbyn. In terms of the tax base, I mean, the British public are crippled by the highest taxes since World War II, and yet still the answer is more taxation. More. If we cut tax and we stimulate, put more money back in people's pockets, that's what we need to do. But at the moment, it's just like, let's just hammer everything for more tax.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to just note that the windfall tax is not a left-wing concept. Conservative governments have implemented windfall tax in the past, in times of extraordinary need. And yes, it is a short-term solution, because a short-term solution is needed. There are families who are currently struggling to put food on the table. We need a government that can address both short-term, medium and long-term challenges.
It will just deter foreign investment. It will send the energy companies abroad. Because Rachel Reeves isn't talking about a short windfall tax. It's 10% rise in corporation tax, which won't go back, because tax tends not to get registered down.
And let's not forget that sector is already uniquely taxed for that exact reason, because of its implications in terms of oil production. Do you want to penalise them further? As you say, it could push investment overseas. It's a big debate. We're not going to solve it all now, but I do want to move on to Northern Ireland, which ties into the whole debate about the cost of living crisis, because we heard the Prime Minister, didn't we, Amy, saying that, you know, this cost of living crisis has changed the dial a bit, and, you know, almost using it as a justification to say we need to look again at this protocol, highly problematic protocol.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting take, and a little bit like Martin's point in the previous story, you often see public figures using external events to justify their own actions, which actually massively predate those external events. This is a deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol is a deal which Boris Johnson's government proposed, presented to the British public as oven-ready, and are now claiming is completely unfit for purpose. I think what we're seeing is political showboating, surprise, surprise, from Boris Johnson and also from Liz Truss in an attempt to distract from other more domestic challenges.
Let's be fair. I mean, they're in paralysis in Stormont. We've just seen an election. Something has to be done to try and redress the situation, impose some sort of democratic process. The Prime Minister, to be fair, is trying to bring that about.
I don't think that threatening to take unilateral action, which previously we've heard would be illegal, is a pragmatic approach to a very real challenge in Northern Ireland.
Go on, Martin.
Well, look, those of us, I went to Brussels as an MEP and, you know, for the Brexit Party, and it's clear where my position was, and that was to go world trade. The Northern Ireland Protocol was a clear fault line. It was obvious at the start that Boris had effectively annexed a part of Britain by putting the whole border down, the sea border in. And now the chickens have come home to roost. The same as on fishing. You know, he betrayed the fishing industry, and on the level playing field, our precise inability to be able to be more competitive in terms of corporation tax cuts, not increases, we can't do. So all of this is very, very predictable. Now, we have a situation now where it's given political opportunity to Sinn Féin, who, let's not forget, only a generation ago were using bombs, not the ballot box. And we've seen a surge in Irish nationalism because of this political fault line. This was coming like a slow-motion train down the track. And I think Boris Johnson is entirely responsible. Now, those who said, oh, don't worry, they can negotiate, it's like they don't understand how Brussels works.
So in your scenario, in your solution, because whichever way you look at it, someone's going to lose out here.
Yeah.
So the Unionists lose out, or the EU lose out, or the UK lose out. In your scenario, we'll forget about what the EU want.
Yeah.
And we forget about the trade and cooperation agreement anyway. Have a trade war.
My position has been consistent. The NI protocol should be torn up and we should stop negotiating with Brussels.
But the problem with that is we're already in a cost of living crisis and we need a trade war with Europe like a hole in the head, and it would affect ordinary people. And that's why this is such an awful conundrum. Washington have said the same. They don't approve of unilateral action, and we also want a trade deal with them.
It's funny.
At least you're consistent in your position.
Yeah,
that's something other people haven't been.
Yeah, I am consistent. Isn't it funny how people who are very in favour of Remain consistently said, no, Donald Trump stopped meddling in British politics, and yet when Joe Biden says you must leave the protocol in place, everyone's in favour of that. Look, the fact of the matter is there's no easy solution. There's an absolute stalemate in Stormont. Anybody who follows the situation saw this coming a mile off, and I think Boris has to own this. It's his making. It's a disaster.
Yeah, just quickly, what would you do, Amy?
So I think the EU have offered some reasonable concessions. I think we need to, as ever with this, we need to dial down the rhetoric and get back to the negotiating table. I think it's really important to remember that a majority of Assembly members in Stormont support the protocol, although they do recognise some changes need to be made. So I think this kind of blustering talk about just scrapping it, unilateral action, is playing to a base who I actually think we might be somewhat at the end of the ideological road with, because very few people in England are particularly energised about the Northern Irish protocol. They're much more concerned about cost of living. Yeah. Very few people in Northern Ireland want to see a trade war, which will push their cost of living crisis.
I suppose the base could be arguably the DUP, and if you can persuade them with this bluster and rhetoric, as you call it, to then go into some sort of power-sharing agreement, that would restore the democratic process. And you could then retract some of what you said to EU. I suppose, I'm hoping that might be the reason behind it. But again, such a big topic and so many stories in the papers that I know. Well, we've got three paper reviews, but we could just specialise on protocol all morning. But I do want to talk about what's happened overnight in Ukraine, because it is quite miraculous, frankly. And a picture on the front of the Times, which I've put on my Instagram this morning, absolutely amazing photograph. I'm told that we can show you as well at home. And this is a chink of light coming through the roof of the Azovstal steelworks, where there's incredibly brave Ukrainian soldiers have been holed up for months without any antibiotics or medical equipment, food supplies, all the rest of it. Now, we're told around 260 of them. Isn't that just the most amazing photograph?
I genuinely thought at a distance that was someone at a concert.
Same,
I actually thought that. Yeah,
Ed Sheeran or that's
just a chink of light in the darkness. What a picture, what a story. But you've chosen this story, Martin, to talk about, actually specifically talking about Putin, and I can well believe this, but accused of meddling, trying to do the job of a colonel.
Yeah, I mean, it'll probably come as a surprise for absolutely nobody that Vladimir Putin is acting like a despotic control freak over his own military. And rather than being the president, he's actually overreaching into the realms of performing the job of a colonel. So he's making ground directives that can move as many as 700 troops at one go. This is a power-mad dictator playing with a war board like we've seen throughout history. And the image itself, I think, will go down as one of the totemic images of our times, because in many senses it offers that feeling of this messianic fight against the force of evil. And what an amazing image it is. And I think that's going to be top of the list for Pulitzer Prizes and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. What a picture. What a picture.
Yeah. Amy?
Yeah, I think we've known from the outset of this crisis and this invasion that Putin has very little military expertise, and he has isolated himself from those previously within his circles who may have had some. There was firing of generals right at the start of the war, of the invasion rather, because of how badly it went. Many people on kind of much closer to this issue than I would say that Putin doesn't receive briefings properly anymore. We saw those ridiculous images of him at the start of the invasion, sitting at one end of that giant table. He's not listening to people with military expertise, and as Martin says, like any despot, he's high on his own power and wildly overreaching, and it's having devastating consequences, not just for Ukrainians who are obviously seeing the the devastation of their cities, but also for Russians who've been sent into an unjust war and are now effectively being slaughtered through extreme military incompetence. The images from the bridge, attempt to take over the bridge at the weekend, were devastating. And many of these Russians either do not support or did not know what they were entering into. These are effectively the actions of one man.
Yeah. Amy, thank you so much. Thanks a lot to Martin as well. We'll have more from you guys later on in the programme.
Right, with the time 6:49, let's bring you up to date on those latest headlines this morning. And the Home Secretary is expected to give special constables the powers to use tasers. Speaking at the Police Federation conference in Manchester, Priti Patel will say she's given approval for volunteer police officers to carry the weapons if chief officers authorise it.
More than half of people across the UK say their health is getting worse because of the rising cost of living. The YouGov poll shows 84% said their health is getting worse due to increasing heating costs, and 78% cited the rising cost of food. 1 in 4 had been told by a doctor that stress is a driving factor of their ill health.
The Earl of Wessex will board a train at Paddington Station today, marking the completion of London's Crossrail project. Edward will meet the Prime Minister and Mayor of London, as well as key staff in the project, with the very first ticket for the new Elizabeth line. He'll then be heading to Tottenham Court Road Station before coming back again. The line, named after his mother, the Queen, will open to the public on the 24th of May. And I'd imagine that's the first and last time he'll use the line as well.
Well, possibly, yes, quite possibly. Yeah, I'm actually a bit nerdy, quite excited about Crossrail.
Are you?
Well,
Yeah,
just because it's Europe's biggest infrastructure project. It's just, I'm a bit of a nerd about things like that. Anyway, exciting for people like me. But yeah, as we've been discussing, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, is warning of apocalyptic food prices as inflation increases. Joining us now is our excellent business and economics editor, Liam Halligan. Morning, Liam.
You say all the right things, Paul. All the right things.
Listen, what can we expect from the Chancellor later today? They're talking about, in fact, the Telegraph cheekily headlined it, Rishi Sunak's windfall tax a few days ago. Are we going to see that?
I think it's on the cards. I've been saying it's going to be on the cards for quite a few weeks now. This is, of course, a Labour Party proposed policy. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, she was talking about a windfall tax many months ago. And I just think the politics of this, whatever you think of the economics, and I listened to the discussion you had leading up to this earlier on the show, I think whatever the economics of it, the politics is simply irresistible to tax these big oil and gas giants. The likes of BP made £5.1 billion in profit in the first quarter, the first 3 months of this year. Shell made £7.4 billion in the first 3 months of this year, not because they've done anything different, but just because the war in Ukraine has led to energy prices spiraling. If you tax those, they don't vote, you say you're giving the money to hard-pressed households, that adds up to some quite attractive politics for ministers who really are running out of ideas about what to do. And this off the back, of course, of those incredibly strong words from the Governor of the Bank of England yesterday, talking about apocalyptic food price rises, throwing his hands up in the air, saying, look, I can't bring down inflation. I can't do anything about the cost of living crisis. 80% of the increase in inflation we've seen in recent months, and inflation is now up at 7%. We've got figures coming out tomorrow that probably show the cost of living is going up by 9%. The Bank of England is saying that 80% of that inflation is coming from external factors like food price rises, like energy price rises. Even if they raised interest rates, it wouldn't do anything to rein in that inflation. And that really is the conundrum that we face. You know, economics is very, very difficult at the moment. And that's why, you know, conservative governments will reach for populist things in order to try and convince people that they care and they're doing something about this.
Yes, they'll reach for populist things, but they'll also come out with some very patronising advice. Rachel McLean yesterday saying that people should travel further and work longer and get other jobs. And then we heard from Andrew Bailey himself suggesting, again, people shouldn't be asking for pay rises. And it's just this kind of rhetoric that people are hearing when they're already working 2 jobs, struggling to pay the bills and doing everything they possibly can, that really, really goes down badly.
I think you're right, Isabel. It winds me up that our political and parts of our media class, to be honest, present company accepted, they don't really understand the scale of this cost of living crisis. Some of us have been talking about it for months and months and months. It's very, very serious. You had the excellent National Institute of Economic and Social Research, one of Britain's leading think tanks. I know we've been citing them this morning as well, saying that 1.5 million people are going to find themselves in destitution. Their definition of that is living on less than 150 quid a week of disposable income. I personally think that there is going to have to be some action taken on energy prices, maybe with the state getting heavily involved in the energy market, buying the energy on the behalf of the state and then selling it on at a certain price in order to bring down those household fuel bills. That sounds completely extreme, but I think we're in very, very difficult circumstances here. Look, what's happening is it's the combination of coming out of lockdown, where you have a huge surge in demand and the global economy, the supply side, if you like, can't respond. So you get a big wall of demand and limited supply of goods, and that pushes up inflation. And then on top of that, the war in Ukraine, which has played havoc with global food and energy prices. And we've got an inflation number coming out tomorrow. It will be something like 9%, up from 7%. But, it seems to me that if you tell somebody on a low income that inflation is going up from 7.9%, that their cost of living is 7 or 9% higher than it was a year ago, they'll think that's a sick joke. Food prices are up 30 or 40%. Energy prices have just gone up 54%. These numbers, I'm not saying that the Office of National Statistics doesn't do a good job. It's full of excellent people, many of whom I know, as you'd imagine, in my job. But the methodology we're using, and indeed, Isabel, the language we're using, isn't just capturing the scale of the problem that ordinary people are facing. And that's why people get exasperated when they hear politicians and very, very highly paid public servants like Andrew Bailey using language which winds them up.
Yeah, I think you've explained it brilliantly there, Liam. Looking forward to On the Money later at the usual time, I presume.
Of 1 p.m. Yeah, we've been going on about these issues for many, many, many months. Economics and business, it isn't always seen as the most interesting and gripping part of what our media does. But believe you me, it's going to absolutely dominate our national discourse for at least the next year.
OK, Liam, we look forward to your show. Thank you so much for joining us from your kitchen table. As always, a little bit of home economics for us this morning. See you later on. Right, do stay with us. Lots more coming this way on what those apocalyptic warnings mean for you. Could we see food prices going through the roof? All the details coming up.
Yep.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Pretty warm one for some of us today, likely to be the warmest day of the year so far. Across parts of eastern England, 26, maybe 27 degrees Celsius. Further west, things are not so straightforward. Low pressure is here and this weather front is slowly trickling in. That's going to bring some clouds and some outbreaks of rain at times to Northern Ireland, westernmost fringes of Wales, and later on today, western Scotland and the far southwest of England. Quite misty and murky around the coast of northeast Scotland, and again here it's going to suppress the temperatures, but for many places it's dry and fine, hazy sunshine, and it is warm out there as well. Temperatures ticking up steadily through the day, so across the Midlands to eastern England, 23 in Hull and Birmingham, 26 in London, maybe 27 in one or two locations, whereas Belfast 15 or 16 with the cloud and the rain moving in here, which could be quite heavy this evening across western areas. At the same time, the warmth and humidity over France could trigger some thunderstorms which may drift northwards across East Anglia and the southeast. So potential for some quite heavy rain during this evening. But it does all tend to scoot away, and most places, again, become dry through the early hours. Temperatures holding up in double figures in most towns and cities. And again, Wednesday will, by and large, be a fine day. There will, again, be a bit of mist here and there early on, and there will be a few showers to come in, particularly parts of western Scotland. But a brighter day for Northern Ireland and West Wales. Again, quite breezy, but generally another fine, warm day. Perhaps not quite as warm as today, but we should still get temperatures quite widely over 20 Celsius across England and Wales, and a warmer day for Northern Ireland, as I mentioned, probably 24, 25 the peak. However, further south, again, the potential for some thunderstorms through Wednesday evening. Some heavy downpours are possible across parts of England. We'll be keeping a close eye on that.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
The Commons will debate a windfall tax on energy companies as the boss of the Bank of England warns of apocalyptic food prices.
Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Tuesday, the 17th of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Paul. Here's what is leading the news this morning.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak will face the House of Commons today as it debates the cost of living crisis. Labour is expected to use the debate to force a vote on a windfall tax that it says could give struggling families £600.
Comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, blamed the war in Ukraine for the highest inflation in decades. And he warned that apocalyptic, that's his word, food prices could be devastating for the poor.
More than 260 Ukrainian soldiers have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, many to Russian-controlled areas. It will likely mark the end of one of the longest battles of the Ukraine war so far.
And Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall will fly to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Tour. Prince of Wales's visit is part of a series of trips by senior royals to Commonwealth countries on behalf of the monarch.
And as always, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us @gbnews.
Yeah, and don't forget you can subscribe to the GB News channel on YouTube to get all the latest on the big stories everyone is talking about.
Well, to our top story this hour, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will face Parliament today as the Commons debates tackling the short-term and long-term cost of living increases.
Yeah, it's part of the Queen's speech debate, and Labour is expected to use it to force a vote on a windfall tax for energy companies that they say could give struggling families £600 a year back.
Well, this comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, told the Treasury Select Committee that apocalyptic food prices could have a disastrous impact on the poor. He also said that the war in Ukraine was to blame for the worst inflation in 3 decades.
Yeah, the debate in the Commons on the cost of living comes in the wake of controversial comments by Tory Minister Rachel Maclean, who suggested that people could protect themselves from the cost of living crisis by working more hours or moving to a higher paid job. Here's how she responded when we asked her about those comments on the programme yesterday.
Remarks that I made about people taking on more hours are part of our plan to help people get back into work. We've got a very good record of helping people get back into work after the COVID crisis, and also to enable them to, if they want to, and it's right for them, to increase their skills.
OK, well, we're joined in the studio by our GB News political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Good to see you, Tom. Let's start with today, then. The Chancellor in the Commons, he will be under pressure to bring in this windfall tax. Lots of rumours circulating that perhaps he's warming to the idea. It almost becomes a political thing, though, if it's been suggested by the opposition. How likely is it that the Conservatives could adopt this policy, and what are the arguments for and against?
I think it's relatively unlikely at this stage, albeit just over a week ago, the Chancellor on a Mumsnet Q&A seemed to say that he wasn't implacably opposed to the idea, that all options remain on the table. But the argument of the government as a whole remains that investment is incredibly important. And the reason why they don't want to whack this arbitrary tax on North Sea oil and gas, whack this a tax that is not predictable, is that there needs to be a very level and predictable level of taxation for that long-term investment to take place, for the renewable transition to take place, and to enable UK energy security. That's the argument of the government. On the other hand, the Labour Party has been saying for quite some time now that none of these companies expected to make the level of profit that they're making this year. Without any brilliant move, the levels of oil and gas, the prices of those have gone up without any sort of business nous from these companies. So why should they take all of these profits? Although I suppose on the other hand as well, they have made big losses in previous years as well. So sort of swings and roundabouts there. As far as the Chancellor has been saying, he's saying that this remains on the table, but he doesn't want to go down this route because he wants to encourage that investment. So it remains almost as a bit of a threat to those companies. If that investment doesn't come about, if we don't see a greater investment, particularly in renewables and our own energy security, then it remains something that could be used, although the government is sort of steering away from that at this point.
Yeah, just ignoring for a second the practicalities of it. I mean, The Guardian's own finance editor said that it would only raise a modest amount of money. The optics of it, there's two ways to look at it if you're Rishi Sunak. It looks great and it's populist, it'll raise a bit of money. You know, the big, horrible oil companies, they're losing some money and you're giving it back to the people. Or the other way to look at it is you're raising another tax. And I've already got a reputation for tax raising when I keep telling everyone I'm a tax cutter.
It's interesting, actually, the Labour Party in the local elections pointed to the overall tax burden as something that was dragging this country's growth potential. Well, the tax burden grows if you tax anything. It doesn't just grow if you tax individuals. It also grows if you tax businesses. And ultimately, taxing businesses are made up of individuals. It's a sort of a legal fiction, a company. If you tax that, ultimately, that tax falls on something in the end. And that will fall on wages, and that will fall on prices, or that will fall on investment. And the judgment, it looks like, of the Treasury is that a tax on these oil and gas companies would fall on investment. And that might be a bit of a worry in the future for the UK's energy security.
Yeah, obviously lots of reflections today on what was said at the Treasury Select Committee by Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, yesterday, pretty much saying that his hands were tied. There was only so much he could do to cope with external factors. Is there more that the Chancellor could do? And I know we've talked about windfall taxes, but could he be cutting taxes at this point? And there's no plans, we're told, for an emergency budget, but we constantly talking on this programme about whether or not to cut tariffs on food, whether or not to cut VAT on fuel, for example, those green levies on bills. Why aren't these all being discussed or considered by the Chancellor? If he's opposed to raising taxes, why won't he be open to perhaps cutting some?
Well, it's interesting. There's the big worry about inflation and whether this is demand pull or cost push inflation. Fiscal transfer to some degree might be actually counterproductively inflationary if you might put more money, increase the money supply or put more money into people's pockets by a bad degree. That could actually push prices up further, even though it sounds like a good thing to do. So there are some worries there. But also, we know there have been discussions in Cabinet about, for example, taking off those tariffs on goods that we don't produce in the UK, about potentially bringing forward that income tax cut that is due to come in 2024. There are these discussions taking place, but equally, there isn't a big fiscal event scheduled until the autumn, and that really is going to come about when the price cap for energy is re-evaluated, because that's a 6-month cyclical event. So the next time that event is, that'll sort of be timed for the next Treasury statement. So maybe there'll be some moving there. But as things stand, really what we have been hearing about is not particularly that big set-piece fiscal event to help out, but more tweaking around the edges. And you're right, the Bank of England has been saying for some time that this will be a transitory phenomenon. The Bank of England said it would peak at 5% inflation in this country. Well, we're already long beyond 5% and now we're expecting to get into double figures. It has to be said that central banks around the world did not see this coming. It's quite remarkable that the Bank of England has come under actually a little bit of political attack now as well, because it has basically one job, which is to keep inflation down to 2%. And whichever way you look at it, it did not see this inflation coming, and it has failed to deal with this inflation with historically low interest rates for the past over a decade now. And that has come under some political criticism yesterday.
Yeah, do you remember that, the days of inflation targets of 2%? Those are the days, weren't they? Hi, Tom, good to see you this morning. Thank you. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent. Do let us know what you think the Chancellor should be doing. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Now, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall are to travel to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee tour.
Yeah, our royal reporter Cameron Walker is travelling to Canada for the tour, and he sent us this sneak preview of what we can expect.
The next generation of Canadians proudly waved their national flag, welcoming Charles and Camilla to their High Commission ahead of the royal tour. These are the children many fear who'll have to live with the consequences of climate change. The Prince of Wales believes we need to take better care of our planet, and his status as heir to the throne, Canada's High Commissioner to Britain believes, can champion change.
Prince Charles plays an important role in the world in catalyzing action around climate change. He can be very influential in getting governments and businesses focused and committed.
Parts of Canada's northwest are experiencing heavy flooding for a second year in a row, and Prince Charles and Camilla will hear firsthand how it's impacting Indigenous communities. The royal couple will travel more than 2,000 miles across the country, also spending time in Newfoundland and the country's capital, Ottawa. But Canada's past could come back to haunt them. Protesters toppled statues of Her Majesty the Queen and Queen Victoria last year over the discovery of unmarked graves of Indigenous children who were sent to residential schools in the 19th and 20th centuries. Meeting members of the Indigenous community will form a big part of the visit, perhaps with a view to avoid similar protests experienced by other members of the royal family on recent tours to the Caribbean. The Queen hasn't visited Canada since 2010. Problems with her movement means Charles is having to take on more of her workload. Richard Bethelson, who's helped organise past royal tours of Canada, suggests Charles should use this opportunity to connect with Canadians.
There is an ongoing kind of debate that's growing about the future of the monarchy as we do approach the end of this reign. People will be looking at Prince Charles and I think really assessing whether they can see him as the next King of Canada.
Prince Charles's great-grandfather, King George V, officially opened Canada House in London almost 100 years ago. It serves as a unique showcase for Canada's culture. The royal couple's visit to the Canadian High Commission was about celebrating Canadians in Britain. This week's trip is about celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in a country that shares her crown. Cameron Walker, GB News, London.
Well, we're joined by the royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Hadel-Manku, who joins us in the studio this morning. Good to see you, Rafe. Do you think that the royal couple will feel a little bit nervous ahead of this tour, given the recent reception that his brother, the Duke of Wessex, and indeed his son, Prince of Wales, received in the Caribbean recently?
Yes, I think that's going to be first and foremost in their mind. So there will be a degree of trepidation. But the Prince of Wales, of course, has been very close to the Indigenous peoples for most of his time that he's been visiting Canada. And it's quite telling that the main focus of this trip will be actually on reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples and also doing something very similar to what Prince Harry's doing in New Zealand. He wants to learn from the Maori, and the Prince of Wales will be saying on this trip, we need to learn from the First Nations people of Canada and how to look after the planet.
Yeah, he's big on green issues, isn't he?
Yeah, he's extremely controversially, I would say, very big on green issues. But this is exactly what is really at the core of so many of the arguments in Canada at the moment. So he's really plugging in to something which I would hope would resonate with the Canadian people. And yet, unfortunately, because the North American media always tend to focus for some strange, bizarre reason on Diana every time that the royal couple set foot on North American territory 25 years after she's died, very little public attention is given to those very causes and issues which are close to his heart and are actually issues of the day.
What about the current government in Canada? Justin Trudeau, of course, the head there. Are they favourable views towards the monarchy? I mean, what's the sort of public mood towards them?
Well, just like his father before him, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau absolutely adores being in the spotlight with the royal family. He enjoys the PR abilities that come from that. But he's done nothing in his 7 years in office to actually demonstrate any affinity with the Crown. In fact, this Platinum Jubilee celebration, which should be the most remarkable of all, given that it's unprecedented, is the most muted Jubilee celebration of all in Canada. And uniquely, they're not issuing a Jubilee medal. We have one in this country that's being issued, but for the first time in history, Canada won't be issuing a Platinum Jubilee medal. And this royal tour, which is done by the invitation of the Canadian government, is for only 3 days. Now, you would have expected at least a week going by previous standards. And I think that's very telling. And the trip is going to places like the Northwest Territories and Newfoundland, places that don't really have that many people around. So it's a very sort of small trip.
Yeah, and that's a political decision not to issue that medal.
That's purely a political decision. The opposition parties have been asking for one. And, of course, Canada is a federal state, and so there are 10 provincial governments, and some of them have actually issued their own Platinum Jubilee medals in protest at the stance taken by Justin Trudeau.
A political decision, but I wonder if it reflects perhaps the mood of the nation. I mean, we were talking earlier about the time Kate was sort of launched on the world stage just after the royal wedding, and the Canadians received her and welcomed her with open arms, and she became a sort of huge sensation. But the public mood in Canada has moved on. There are, as you say, some concerns, particularly about the welfare of the Indigenous populations. There could be protests over the next few days during this tour. Why has the mood towards the monarchy changed? And, you say that's down to the government. Do you think it's led by Trudeau, or do you think Trudeau has followed?
Well, Canada has now, remarkably in the last 10 years, become the world capital of woke, and Justin Trudeau is the emperor of woke. And so it's been absolutely remarkable to see the change from the Diamond Jubilee to the Platinum Jubilee, just in the space of that 10 years. Under Stephen Harper, the previous Prime Minister of Canada, there was a huge outpouring of support and celebration for the Diamond Jubilee. But you're quite right. Canada holds a very special place for the royal family. They visited Canada more than any other country before. And for the Queen Mother, ever since the Queen Mother, it's actually made these people figures on the global stage. So when Wills was 16, Prince William, Wills Mania came onto the world stage. A year after his mother died, he went to British Columbia. He was mobbed by hundreds of screaming teenage girls, sort of Beatlemania style, and that basically announced his arrival on the world stage. And then when he married Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, they went to Ottawa for Canada Day, the nation's biggest celebration. Hundreds of thousands there were yelling.
Was that their honeymoon, or...?
That was just after.
Right.
And she was on stage and she basically arrived. So it's a great shame to see that you're not going to have those sorts of crowds for the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall. But of course, there wouldn't be the crowds anywhere because they're being sent to rather remote places in the country.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting to see how it pans out. Rafe, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Rafe, Handel and co. Right, coming up, we're going to be taking you through the top stories and discussing Jake Daniels. He is the first ever active male professional footballer to come out as gay.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, for many, coming out is one of the hardest things LGBTQ people will ever do. But arguably, to do it within the footballing world is even harder. And that's why in over 30 years, there hasn't been an openly gay footballer.
Yeah, but yesterday, 17-year-old Jake Daniels decided to tell the world the truth about his sexuality and spoke of his relief of being able to do so. Joining us now is Ada McGee and sports broadcaster Mark McAdam, who came out in 2014.
Yeah, hi, Jay. Hi, Paul. Huge news yesterday, but I want to bring in Mark almost straight away because I know he's going to get away. Mark worked alongside me in our previous role at Sky. Mark, you came out yourself back in September 2014. Talk to me about how difficult that was for you, and just take me through what happened yesterday with Jake Daniels, because that was quite a revealing interview he gave. He said that he couldn't go for the rest of his career lying about being gay.
Quite remarkable, wasn't it? Yesterday was a historic day for football. It was the day football changed for the better, all thanks to the courage of a 17-year-old boy. I was just so proud. I was in awe of this young lad that took the mantle that, like you say, where we haven't seen a professional footballer come out for over 30 years. And for such a young lad who made his debut in the Championship at the weekend to be able to do so and feel that he could do so was just remarkable. I was in the closet for a long time and really struggled with my sexuality and battled with my mental health and found things really difficult. And it was only really when I got into my late 20s when I actually decided and felt more comfortable to talk about being gay, working in sport and in football. So for a young lad to do it at this age, it is just remarkable. I take my hat off to him. And I think there will be so many young boys that want to be footballers, that want to play football, that have always been concerned about their sexuality. They'll be looking at Jake and the way he's been received and the way he's been treated since coming out yesterday. And they'll be able to just go into bed sleeping a little bit better because they know that it's accepted and you'll be welcomed and loved and supported for the person you are regardless of your sexuality. And this is just a massive story, and I'm so proud of Jake and what he's been able to do, because I think it will genuinely change.
And Mark, talk to me about your own experience back in 2014, because I remember that with my recollections are that my previous employer could have done more to support you, but football more generally were quite welcoming, weren't they? Particularly the club you covered, Bournemouth. Do you think that's going to be the same for Jake Daniel? Do you think football is ready to embrace that?
Absolutely. I think when you look at what's happened over the course of the last 24 hours or so, just before Jake came out, the support he's received on social media from so many footballers, so many football clubs, it was amazing to see the likes of Manchester United reply to Blackpool's tweet within a few minutes to offer their support. And you look at Jake's social medias, go from a couple of thousand followers to 40,000 this morning when I last looked. I think that's an indication as to how much love and support there is out there for the LGBTQ plus community. In terms of a personal thing, I really battled and struggled with my mental health when it came to coming out and talking about my sexuality. And obviously I did it in 2014, and it doesn't sound like that long ago, but things were so different back then. We didn't have a Rainbow Laces campaign. We didn't have a Football v Homophobia month. We didn't have all of these things that are happening now in terms of campaigns to raise awareness and educate people and talk about language and make people from the LGBTQ plus community feel safe within sport. Whereas we've got that now. We've got education. We've got all these tools in place. And the people at the football clubs are aware that there are going to be gay footballers, and they need to be careful about their language, and they need to be there to support these people. And I think that's one of the clear messages I took from yesterday and Jake coming out, is that Blackpool clearly is a club that is supportive. Clearly, Jake felt comfortable in himself to speak to his manager, to speak to his teammates and the people around him and say, look, I'm gay and I want support and I want to come out and I want to talk about this. And you can only do that if you're in the right environment to be able to express yourself and be your authentic self. And that's probably one of the most pleasing things, because everyone talks about football being in the dark ages, and it is in so many ways. But clearly, Blackpool is very much in the future with the way they've dealt with this and the way they've made Jake feel.
Mark, fantastic input from you this morning. Great to see you as well. It was always a pleasure working with you. 5,000 PFA players in this country, one has come out as gay. It just doesn't add up.
Is it the club or is it the fans, in your opinion?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, you're battling, as Mark sort of alluded to there, you're battling the old school managerial. What a manager might think about someone coming out as gay. They might think that, this is what Jake Daniel referred to yesterday, he might think that a player's weak because they're gay. Then you've got the fans element as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they're much more accountable fans now. There's so many more season tickets in the stadiums that they're accountable more for what they do. It's not like in 30 years ago where you could turn up, pay a fiver, no one knew who you were. They weren't accountable for what you did.
They know who's there, yeah. And just very quickly, last night, Arsenal, they're having a dreadful run of it in that battle for fourth spot in the Premier League. They've gone a bit Spursy.
They were gutless last night, I have to say. I watched it from start to finish. They had a huge opportunity last Thursday when they were playing Tottenham. They absolutely bottled that. And then last night, I mean, if you're going into the last few games of the season, you've got 2 games to really define your season. You lose 3-0 at Tottenham in the local derby. Well, I'll tell you what Newcastle did last night. They saw the difference the crowd made on that Arsenal team last Thursday, and they ramped it up last night. They had flags in the crowd. St James's Park was as loud as it had been in probably 20 years, and the Arsenal players folded. There's no other way of putting it.
So Spurs beat Norwich on the final day, they get fourth spot, and Arsenal have on the final day?
They have Everton at home, but Tottenham don't even need to win. They can just get a draw away to Norwich, who are the no-hopers of the league, bottom of the league.
Aidan, thank you. Aidan McGee there, sports broadcaster there, rounding up what happened in the Premier League last night.
Now, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is set to give a speech on street violence at the Police Federation's annual conference today.
Yeah, it comes a day after she lifted restrictions on stop and search, giving officers the right to search people without reasonable grounds in areas where they expect serious violence.
Well, for more, let's speak now to a former Met superintendent and the first chair of the National Black Police Association, Leroy Logan. Very good morning to you. Look, what was your reaction when you heard about these plans?
Well, if you just go by the Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, which means officers can stop people without reasonable grounds, people of colour, African, Caribbean, Asian origins, are 20 times more likely to be stopped than their white counterparts. So if that's been running for over 20 years, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to have widespread, disproportionate stop and search. It's going to reduce trust and confidence, increase tension between the black community and the police. Even up to yesterday, we saw footage of people being on the receiving end of very heavy-handed policing.
Yeah.
So this,
can I just ask you on that disproportionate
figure?
figure? Sorry to interrupt you. Just wanted to pick up on one particular comment. A lot of people will argue, yes, it's disproportionate in terms of race. Is it disproportionate in terms of crime rates?
Crime rates in what way?
Well, as in, are these people being disproportionately targeted because that particular minority is disproportionately causing the crimes? And that is the question that people might ask. It's not my opinion, obviously.
Well, the data doesn't show that. And we have seen, even from Home Office data units, does not show that you increase stop and search and you have a decrease in crime. There's never been a correlation. So that this sort of idea that is a disproportionate number of crimes in the black community, again, shows a lack of objectivity. It shows in a lot of ways you're buying into this narrative that certain communities, whether it's under colour or class, are disproportionately committing crimes. And that's not the case. It's just like saying poor people are more likely to go and steal.
Priti Patel says the use of stop and search has increased by 85% since 2019 and contributed to 50,000 weapons being taken off the streets. That's a good thing, right?
It's good to know the scale of the problem, but you need to understand you can't arrest your way out of this problem. You can't stop and search your way out of the problem. You've got to work with the community. If they're on the receiving end of disproportionate, heavy-handed policing, they're not going to be talking to the police. I myself was based in Hackney, where I saw a lot of footage from yesterday. If you don't have that good relationship with all the communities, they're not going to tell you where the knives are stashed, the drugs are stashed, other weapons are stashed. They're not going to give you good source information that you proactively deploy your officers in a way that you target the right people, the people who are committing the crimes, who are in the gangs, who are into county lines. This is just a clear way of dealing with it, not thinking, oh, we just go in with enforcement and you're just going to arrest and stop and search your way out of the problem.
Leroy, what's your experience of stop and search? Because I'm wondering, is it the fact you've been stopped and searched, or someone is stopped and searched, or is it the way it happens?
Well, I've been on both receiving ends. I've been stopped and searched as young as 12, 13 in the school confines. They did a film about my life, and the first scene is little Leroy Logan being stopped and searched in school uniform after band practice by 2 officers. That's not drama, that was real. I have used stop and search in an objective and intelligence-based way. I've even been stopped and searched after I retired. Just understand it. Stop and search is a good tool. I'm not saying don't use it, but it's a blunt tool, which is sharpened up with trust and confidence and community intelligence. So the more information you get from the community is directly related to the relationship you have with them. So you've got to work with that target group, even the young people. And I've been running a charity for over 20 years called Void Youth. And those young people are year 9 students, 14, 15-year-olds, and they say on a regular basis they feel over-policed and underprotected, and they're less likely to work with the police and less likely to tell them what's going on. And that cannot assist officers to deploy their assets in a way that you target the people who are committing the crimes, carrying the drugs and carrying the weapons.
Yeah, look, it's obviously a highly controversial practice. Stand Up to Racism saying that their civil rights were being thrown in the bin by Priti Patel. Priti Patel, of course, arguing that she wants to bring crime rates down, specifically knife crime, which, as we know, claims loads of innocent people's lives every year. Let us know your views at home. We have to say goodbye to Leroy Logan, the first chair of the National Black Police Association. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme this morning. And at home, let us know what you think about all of this. Get in touch the usual ways, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
Yeah, it's 7:32. Stay with us. We're taking you through the papers with Martin Dormy and Amy Cameron after this.
morning from 6 o'clock. We'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching GB News Breakfast. Good to have you with us this morning. It is 7:34. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening this morning.
More than 260 Ukrainian servicemen have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steelworks and Mariupol. Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister Anna Maliar says 53 are injured and were taken to hospital. All of the evacuees will now be subject to an exchange.
Elsewhere this morning, more than half of people across the UK say their health is getting worse because of the rising cost of living. The YouGov poll shows 84% said their health is getting worse due to increasing heating costs, and 78% cited the rising cost of food. 1 in 4 had been told by a doctor that stress is a driving factor of their ill health.
The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will reflect on victims of a school scandal in Canada when their tour of the nation begins. Charles and Camilla will visit a garden dedicated to Indigenous children forced into Canadian society, which saw thousands die or abused. It kicks off a 3-day trip around the Commonwealth country as part of Canada's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Well, it's time to go through the papers this morning with the Deputy Leader of the Reclaim Party, Martin Daubney, and the environmental campaigner, Amy Cameron. A very warm welcome back to both of you. Should we start with the story that is inside, well, pretty much most of the papers, but Amy, you've chosen the I's take on it, and this is the coming out of Jake Daniels, age 17, but wise beyond his years.
Yeah, I think this is such a wonderful story of bravery from this incredibly young man. So he's a 17-year-old player for Blackpool. I know you guys have been covering this all morning. I think the story is kind of bizarre in some ways, that in the times that we currently live in, that he is the first openly gay player in 30 years. And I think it just demonstrates what a long shadow the tragedy of Justin Fashanu has cast over the sport. It is sort of, on an odds basis, impossible that he is the only gay football player in the Premier League or in any league in the UK or across the world, really. And I think Martin and I were discussing this in the break and agreeing that I think this is an incredible act from him. I think it needs to be backed up, hopefully, by other players who are in a more advanced stage of their career coming out to support him and possibly coming out themselves. I don't want to pressure anybody to do something they're not comfortable with, but this is a lot of weight to be put on this young man's shoulders, and I hope that it triggers a culture where more players feel like they can be authentically themselves on the public stage.
Does the pressure need to be put on the players, or does the pressure need to be put on the fans and, indeed, as Aidan was saying, the managers to try and make them feel welcome? Because the big fear is probably amongst their friends and their loved ones. They have come out, but once the terraces get wind, terrible treatment. We see it with racism as well.
Yeah, football is a much more accommodating and inclusive and open-minded sport now than it was in the time of Justin Fashanu. I'm a Nottingham Forest fan. I remember it's a real tragedy. In fact, Brian Clough, who's my lifelong hero, is one of the only regrets he had in his career. He didn't support Justin enough. He, of course, hung himself. A desperately sad end, but it's not like that now. I've worked on tabloid sports desks for a number of years, and it's well known that there are a significant number of gay players
yes, but why
at the top level.
There is a problem.
Yeah, well, OK, so I don't think it's necessarily about the abuse from the terraces. I think it's just more a worry about... Don't forget, we're in an era, the next World Cup in Qatar, where it's still illegal to be a homosexual. You can still be imprisoned for being a homosexual. There's a huge conversation around homophobia in sport, and actually, it's not from the terraces, it's from the very top of the game. And I think the Qatar World Cup is going to bring this whole conversation out, because it's one thing to wear a few pride laces or fly a flag, but when we have the hosts of the World Cup punishing homosexuality by imprisonment, we've still got a long way to go. But this kid, you know, fair credit to him. Like you say, he's got the ladder first, and I think it's a great move.
I think you're absolutely right, Martin. Again, we're surprisingly agreeing this morning.
What's going on?
Give it time.
What is happening? Is it April Fools? But I would totally agree. It speaks to a wider culture. We have to remember, exactly as you say, that these players play on an international stage. I think, one, there are questions to be raised about how easy it is, even in today's age, to be gay and openly gay in the UK. And we've actually really disappointingly seen the UK drop from first place to 14th place in terms of rights and safety for LGBTQ plus people in the last few years. That's a pretty damning indictment of possibly a culture which is not going in the direction I think the vast majority would want it to move. But Martin is right to raise that these players play on an international stage. And I think it's very easy for us to forget just what a difficult time many gay people, not just sports people, but tourists, travellers, people working in foreign countries face. Newcastle United, we know, is owned by Saudi Arabia, who executed 5 gay men very recently because homophobia is sentenced with death in that country. So I think this young man is incredibly brave, and I think we should, to your point, Isabel, look at how Blackpool have supported him to feel safe in coming out in this way.
But we also need to give our country credit. Now, when it comes to racism, intolerance, homophobia on the terraces within football, we are standard bearers and leaders in this debate compared to like East Europe and the Middle East.
Yeah, that's true. Moving on, Martin, I'm interested in the story that simply says here, criminals work from home.
Yeah,
is this burglars, house burglars?
Yeah. So one of the kind of perhaps unforeseen knock-on effects of the pandemic is that community work took a back seat. And if you remember, Boris Johnson wanted community work to basically mean chain gangs of men in fluorescent vests scrubbing graffiti off walls so their criminality could be seen as a deterrent to others. Now, of course, that wasn't possible in the pandemic when we were all housebound. As a consequence, there are now 13,000 criminals who are unable to fulfil their work, their community work. And that's hundreds of thousands of man-hours. And the solution is that they're being sent projects in a box. This is basically crafts boxes, sort of things that I do with my kids at home. So they're being asked to make masks and greeting cards from home as punishment. It's cheap, it's easy, and it's catching on.
Masks, as in for COVID type masks.
Yeah.
So it's actually still a useful. It's not just making a pretty picture to put on their wall. It's something for society.
I think masks are no longer required anywhere in the UK.
But they're still used presumably in hospitals or various...
I don't think we'll be using medical-grade masks being made by criminals at home. I think that's a bit of a blind alley. Anyway, the point of this, I think, people will say, we've got record knife crime, we're talking about ramping up stop and search, and that's being said, well, you can't do that. And now criminals can sit at home, put their feet up, have a nice latte and make a mask. And is that really punishment?
Well, what should they be doing?
They should be back on the streets. You know, I got a cab in this morning. I got a cab in this morning across London. It's graffiti everywhere. I was in Nottingham, my home city, at the weekend. Filthy streets because the council's bankrupt. You know, let's keep the streets clean, respectable, and make it visual. Not being cosily sat at home making masks. I think it's a soft touch.
And just before we will come, because I can feel you wanting to come in. But whilst you're up and on the topic of crime and punishment, I'm interested in your views on what Leroy Logan was saying to us a short while ago on the channel. We were talking about stop and search and disproportionately targeting people from, I think he was talking about black and Afro-Caribbean communities, and lots of people emailing in wanting to get to the bottom of the statistics. And I know you've got a view on that.
Yeah, I was watching this in the foyer and I was very much wanting to come into this debate because the standard stop and search is an effective part of reduction of knife crime. And if you looked at the standard bearers of this in Glasgow and in Liverpool, they clamped down on knife crime with zero tolerance, 3 strikes and you're out. Stop and search worked. And the criminals there disproportionately happened to be white guys. And nobody called about racism then. They were just the most likely people in the most likely areas using offender profiling to be targeted. And in London, if you look at the faces of the dead, you cannot argue that the murder victims and those using knives are disproportionate from black and ethnic minority communities. It's just a fact. That's not racist. So if you're a policeman policing those streets, those are the most likely offenders, therefore you're most likely to search them.
OK, but is it creating new problems? As a tool, is it ineffective because it creates new problems in terms of alienation, mistrust, all of those kinds of feelings of discrimination within an already, struggling community?
Yeah, but then you could argue, I think, with some justification that policing has gone soft in London anyway. The Metropolitan Police do have a PR issue with the community, the black community. That undeniably goes back to the days of Stephen Lawrence. But nevertheless, going soft hasn't worked. Sadiq Khan called for a cut back of stop and search. Where has that got London? Record numbers of bodies piling up.
Well, let's bring Amy in. Views on chain gangs and stop and search?
Just 2 light issues to cover quickly. I think on the stop and search thing, one, as Leroy Logan mentioned in the previous piece, it's not proven to be a particularly effective tool. It's far too indiscriminate. And as you touched on there, Isabel, it tends to drive up other incredibly unhelpful relational issues between police and communities. So I think there's questions about whether stop and search is in and of itself an effective tool. My second point is that even if we were to believe it was an effective tool, presumably it has to be being administered by a police force that we do not believe to be institutionally racist. There are serious questions about the Met Police on that basis at the moment. We have seen sort of scandal after scandal in terms of the way they treat women and communities of colour. I think it is incredibly risky to be putting a tool like this into the hands of a police force that we have serious reservations about when it comes to their ability to treat different communities fairly and with respect.
But what's the priority? You're stopping murders or offending people's feelings? I mean, seriously.
But I don't. That's an entirely false choice.
It's not.
To present. I think if we want to stop murders, we need to look at the driving forces behind crime within communities, which tend to be people feeling disenfranchised, people feeling disrespected, people feeling isolated. We know that punishment is a very poor deterrent.
But has the balance shifted too far towards worrying about offending others? I have a friend who works in the Met who says, in her department, morale is pretty low at the moment, and they feel like they are hugely under pressure. All nicknames have been banned. They can't call anyone anything anymore. It feels very oppressive, and it is hampering her ability to do a job.
Yeah, I would say that in that context, sending police officers out to take action that we know causes tension between them and communities is unlikely to boost morale within the police forces. Surely a better approach would be to review how police can work alongside communities who, don't forget, those communities want more than anyone else to tackle crime, but they are saying that these methods that you are using are exacerbating the problems which drive a sense of isolation and drive a sense of kind of outsiderness instead of building relationships that would genuinely tackle the issues.
I'm just looking down this list of topics, trying to find something light to finish on, and I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I might go rogue, in fact, because my choices are cost of living crisis, windfall tax, migrants sent to York, all really worthwhile topics, but given the heavy subjects, I'm going to go for page 3 of the Mail. I'm going to show you a picture of a dog, Amy. A quarter of us prefer our pets to our partners, according to a study, and we asked people to get in touch, and I have to say, we talk about crazy cat ladies. if I'm just going on our inbox at GB News, it's disproportionately dog men sending in pictures with their beloved dogs. What do you think, panel? Are we a country that perhaps like a furry friend rather than our own partners?
Well, my children love my cat, Harry, more than me.
Ah.
So I completely get it. And I think especially during lockdown, I mean, the amount of dogs you now see around on greens and whatnot, we've become a nation, I think, that have really fallen in love even more with our pets as a source of comfort. I completely concur. I think we've really sort of seen the
particularly
benefit.
Sausage dogs. There appears to be a craze for sausage dogs.
I love
That's
sausage dogs. My daughter had a sausage dog birthday cake. That's how obsessed she is. Amy, come on.
My partner has been blocking my suggestion that we get a dog, and I'm starting to wonder if this might be the reason why. Exactly. No, I'm all for it. Any news story which lets us just hold up a load of pictures of dogs is A-OK in my book.
Yeah, we've got Casper the dog. I don't know if we were able to show you pictures. Michael sent in a picture with his dog Casper. We'll bring them to you a little bit later in the programme if we can't do it now. Paul with his dog Harley. Just so many. The inbox is exploding. Amy, Martin, thank you so much. We'll have more from you, I'm sure, just as controversial and interesting in around 40 minutes' time. Thank you both very much.
Yeah, it is 7:48. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening this Tuesday morning. The Home Secretary expected to give special constables the powers to use tasers. Speaking at the Police Federation conference in Manchester, Priti Patel will say she's given approval for volunteer police officers to carry the weapons if chief officers authorise it.
Rents are nearly £100 a month higher on average than a year ago. According to the property website Zoopla, the average UK monthly rent was £995 in the first quarter of the year. That's an increase of 11% from £897 a year ago. It cites rental growth being driven by high rental demand and limited supply.
The Earl of Wessex will board a train at Paddington Station today, marking the completion of London's Crossrail project. Edward will meet the PM and the Mayor of London, as well as key staff in the project, with the very first ticket for the new Elizabeth line. He'll head to Tottenham Court Road Station before coming back again. The line, named after his mother, the Queen, will open to the public on the 24th of May.
Now, it's set to be a beautiful day for weather, and the weather may well have warmed up across England over the past few days, but overnight, tropical storms illuminated skies right across the south.
Yeah, heavy rain has been sweeping parts of the country, causing meteorologists to issue a weather warning.
Jim Dale is a senior meteorologist at British Weather Services, and he joins us now to tell us exactly what's going on, because take us back a week and we were all predicting a heat wave, and here we are with things like Stonehenge being lit up by the most spectacular kind of tropical lightning scenes. There you can see a little picture there of it at the top of the screen. What's going on?
Good morning. I was actually there yesterday, not for that event, I've got to say. I wish I was, but it's a fantastic place, and yeah, it's very open to the weather, is Stonehenge, sitting on the downs up there on Salisbury Plain and what have you. And yeah, it's very inspiring. And when you get events like that occurring, even more so. No wonder they put the stones in that place.
Why are we getting this at the moment, Jim?
We're getting it. You added the word tropical in there. They're not really tropical. We don't get this out of the equator and the equatorial storms that they see. They're much more. They're far more manifest than we'll ever see in the UK. However, these things are drifting. They were drifting out of France initially. They were meeting the cooler air coming in off the Atlantic. So that clash of air masses, if you like, that's what actually caused the chaos. Started on the south coast and moved its way slowly up north, and doing so. And to be honest with you, yeah, we talk about heat waves, we talk about long stretches of X weather and Y weather, but if you think about March and April, there wasn't a lot going on. We didn't really see the sort of thing that April showers that we normally see. So this kind of event that we've seen this week has been a little bit not out of the blue, but let's just say overdue. And I think when these happen, they do happen with a bang. They've got seriousness about them, and they can cause chaos and damage. And as you're showing now, these fantastic photography that can be seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of displays of lightning that you might see when you're overseas. And I'm thinking of my honeymoon in Borneo when the sky was alight, not the sort of things you typically are used to seeing here in the UK. Some people are asking, has this got anything to do with Sunday night's blood moon? Can that affect the weather?
No, it doesn't. That's
simple answer.
To be honest with you, that's a quick answer. That's completely the wrong science for me. That's above what we call the troposphere, which is where our weather actually stops. So the moon has absolutely nothing to do with it. This is the sort of event that we'll get periodically. As I say, kind of overdue. Whether we see any more this week, I'm not so sure. There will be some showers later this week. Today's probably the warmest day. London area 25, 26. The south generally 21, 22, 23, and the further north you go, it's still very pleasant for the most part. So this is the good stuff. What I should say about these sort of storms, what have you, don't get caught out in them. The first thing to say is take heed of the warnings. Now, at the moment, I think those warnings have passed. But when you see these warnings, don't put yourself in the wrong place. Number two, so open stretches of water, heathland, open fields, parks, these sort of places where you can get yourself in trouble. We do see fatalities from lightning strikes virtually every year. It might only be a small number, but as I say, you can put yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not the thing to do. And if you do find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, then there are certain things you can do to alleviate the risk.
Yeah, like have a brolly. Jim, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much. Jim Dale there, weatherman with the latest on those tropical, I think he would put in inverted commas. Tropical storms.
Now, look, we call ourselves the People's Channel, and that is because not only do we talk about the hard-hitting issues of the day, homosexuality in football, cost of living crisis, criminals working from home, but we also talk about the things that matter to you, and it turns out you really are an audience who loves your pets. You seem to agree with this survey that shows a quarter of us prefer our pets to our partners, and some of you have been sending in pictures. So here is Michael. He sent in this picture of himself with his dog, Casper.
Giving Casper a kiss there. Thank you for that, Michael. Paul says, this is Harley, our rescue dog, cross-border collie spaniel.
Oh, very cute. Looks like a puppy.
Does, yeah.
Very, very fluffy. Nick says, I love my dogs more than life itself.
And we're loving that moustache as well.
It looks like a sausage dog.
It doesn't, yeah.
And they are, as you say, all the rage. Seem to be very trendy at the moment.
Yeah. If you're vegan, do you get a vegan sausage dog? I don't know. Anyway, Adrian in Forest of Dean says, exactly, yeah. Really? This is my therapy cat, my shadow, my fur baby, my best mate, etc. She helps me with my PTSD and other ailments. She is never further than 10 feet away from me. Bless her.
And Lisa says, my man Phil loves his dog, Rocky the Husky, more than me. Which is so, it just seems to be the common theme, doesn't it? Just this absolute love and affection. Paul in Plymouth has also sent in a picture.
Which we can see there. Oh, yes. Harry is my best mate, but he never buys around, though, which is shocking. But,
and if you are listening to us on the radio this morning, you can always catch up with those pictures on the GB News app, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the whole thing back in all its Technicolor glory. But yeah, keep those stories coming. What is it about our pets? I mean, the cynic in me says it's because we don't like people who answer back, or they always greet you with a smile no matter what mood you're in.
Yeah.
Is it just that they're always...
The waggy tail is fantastic when you come in the door.
Calming.
So, yeah, it's great. And if you've got other pets as well, we especially love to hear from you. This isn't just confined to cats and dogs, iguanas, goldfish, whatever you've got, crocodiles, whatever. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
And get in touch on some of the serious issues as well. Whatever your views, whatever your thoughts this morning, keep involved in that conversation. Stay with us. Lots more coming this morning on the rising cost of living and those warnings from the Bank of England about the apocalyptic food prices to come. That's after the all-important forecast.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Pretty warm one for some of us today, likely to be the warmest day of the year so far. Across parts of eastern England, 26, maybe 27 degrees Celsius. Further west, things are not so straightforward. Low pressure is here and this weather front is slowly trickling in. That's going to bring some clouds and some outbreaks of rain at times to Northern Ireland, westernmost fringes of Wales, and later on today, western Scotland and the far southwest of England. Quite misty and murky around the coast of northeast Scotland, and again here it's going to suppress the temperatures, but for many places it's dry and fine, hazy sunshine, and it is warm out there as well. Temperatures ticking up steadily through the day. So across the Midlands to eastern England, 23 in Hull and Birmingham, 26 in London, maybe 27 in one or two locations, whereas Belfast 15 or 16 with the cloud and the rain moving in here, which could be quite heavy this evening across western areas. At the same time, the warmth and humidity over France could trigger some thunderstorms which may drift northwards across East Anglia and the southeast. So potential for some quite heavy rain during this evening. But it does all tend to scoot away, and most places, again, become dry through the early hours. Temperatures holding up in double figures in most towns and cities. And again, Wednesday will, by and large, be a fine day. There will, again, be a bit of mist here and there early on, and there will be a few showers to come in, particularly parts of western Scotland. But a brighter day for Northern Ireland and West Wales. Again, quite breezy, but generally another fine warm day. Perhaps not quite as warm as today, but we should still get temperatures quite widely over 20 Celsius across England and Wales, and a warmer day for Northern Ireland, as I mentioned, probably 24, 25 the peak. However, further south, again, the potential for some thunderstorms through Wednesday evening. Some heavy downpours are possible across parts of England. We'll be keeping a close eye on that.
Tonight on GB News, at 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The Commons will debate a windfall tax on energy companies as the boss of the Bank of England warns of apocalyptic, that's his word, food prices.
Good morning, it's 8:01 on Tuesday the 17th of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Paul. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak will face the House of Commons today as it debates the cost of living crisis. Labour is expected to use the debate to force a vote on a windfall tax that it says could give struggling families £600 a year.
It comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, blamed the war in Ukraine for the highest inflation in decades and warned that, in his words, apocalyptic food prices could be devastating for the poor.
More than 260 Ukrainian soldiers have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, many to Russian-controlled areas. In an address last night, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "We need our heroes alive."
And Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall will fly to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Tour. The Prince of Wales's visit is part of a series of trips by senior royals to Commonwealth countries on behalf of the monarch.
Remember, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can drop us a tweet at gbnews.
And we're asking you to subscribe to our GB News channel on YouTube. Lots of great stuff on there. You can get all the latest on the big stories that everyone is talking about.
To our top story then, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will face Parliament today as the Commons debates tackling the short-term and long-term cost of living increases.
It's part of the Queen's speech debate, and Labour is expected to use it to force a vote on a windfall tax on energy companies that they say could give struggling families around £600.
Yeah, it comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, told the Treasury Select Committee that, and this is his words, apocalyptic food prices could have a disastrous impact on the poor. He also said that the war in Ukraine was to blame for the worst inflation in 3 decades.
Well, the debate in the Commons on the cost of living comes in the wake of controversial comments by the Tory minister Rachel Maclean, who suggested that people could protect themselves from the cost of living crisis by working more hours or moving to a higher paid job. Well, here's how she responded when we asked her about those comments on the programme yesterday.
Remarks that I made about people taking on more hours are part of our plan to help people get back into work. We've got a very good record of helping people get back into work after the COVID crisis, and also to enable them to, if they want to, and it's right for them, to increase their skills.
And some news that's broken in the past few minutes. This is from the Office for National Statistics. They've just said that earnings, when adjusted for inflation, dropped by 1.2% between January and March. That's the biggest fall since 2013. But the unemployment rate has fallen to its lowest level in nearly 50 years. So more jobs, or I should say, more people are employed, but the earnings, though, are falling because of that rising inflation. We can speak now to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, big problems for the government, not many solutions.
Not many immediate solutions, certainly.
Yeah.
And this is the problem because, yes, there are more people in work, more people on payroll than before the pandemic, and those people are being paid more in cash terms. But in real terms, because prices are rising by such a large degree, 7% inflation in the UK, 7.5% inflation in the Eurozone, over 8% inflation in the United States of America, because prices are rising across the whole Western world, even though many people have got pay rises, those pay rises simply aren't keeping up with the cost of living. And that's an intractable problem because, to some extent, paying people more can actually push up those prices yet further. This is something that the Bank of England, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, said yesterday at the Treasury Select Committee with no tact at all. It caused some pretty terrible headlines saying that people shouldn't ask for pay rises because that would push inflation up further.
But
you
do
can't
we want
imagine
the governor to be tactful, or do you want him to be, honest and serious? We can't go through this crisis because he's well paid, talking about how people should deal with inflation. It's an argument.
It's an argument. However, I think that many people would want him to be not just honest, but realistic.
Yeah.
And consider how realistic it is to ask people for, in times like these, to not ask for pay rises, to ask people to sort of take on that individual responsibility. It's a collective action problem because ultimately, how are you not going to ask for a pay rise if you know that your colleague or indeed your neighbour or your family member might? I mean, it's almost like it's something that is said that might not have that much effect and might actually have the opposite effect.
Yeah, and also in the Prime Minister's in tray at the moment is the ongoing Northern Ireland Protocol, and he got a pretty frosty reception from all parties yesterday in Belfast.
He did. Now, there's been much talk about how he's more aligned to the unionist side. Of course, he leads the Conservative and Unionist Party. It's in his party's name. So he's been talking perhaps more closely with the unionist side in politics, the TUV, the UUP, the DUP, who, of course, seem to have lost their... The protocol has lost the consent of the unionist side in Northern Ireland politics. And yet... the DUP saying that they will not take the Prime Minister by his word. They will only take him by his actions. It seems that this is a party scorned because the Prime Minister had made these pledges to the DUP that there would be no further checks in the Irish Sea. Now, how you define a sea border is a realm of semantics, I suppose. There were some SPS checks before Brexit. There have always been a number of checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, but the volume of those checks has increased to a level that makes it seem like it's an entirely different regulatory regime. So we're expecting the announcement, not the text, but the announcement of new legislation today from Liz Truss, who's making a statement, the Foreign Secretary, to suggest what the United Kingdom may do. We're not expecting it to be pushed through today. We're not seeing that legislation in its text, but we are seeing it being used perhaps as leverage, saying to the European Union, you've got to move. We've started this process for legislation to come about, for the UK to create its own green lane, as it's called, within the United Kingdom, from GB to NI, goods that are going to NI that will stay in our NI, being able to move there without let or hindrance. And so that legislation sitting there as an option, the aim there is to help the European Union come to the table, make this bilateral negotiation, but with the understanding that the UK can and will act unilaterally if that doesn't happen.
Tough talk. Yeah. Tom, thank you.
Well, let's turn to Northern Ireland. We can speak to our reporter there, Doogie Beattie, for the very latest from Stormont. And Doogie, you'll have heard what Tom was saying there. Just give us a sense of what the mood is in light of the Prime Minister's visit yesterday and indeed Liz Truss's expected announcement later today.
Yes, well, Sinn Féin came out of those talks yesterday very aggravated. You could see it in them. They accused the, as Tom has said, the Prime Minister of taking the side of unionism. Unionism saying, well, it was for the ferries because he is the British Prime Minister and he should be standing up for British business. Well, you can see why. We're talking about a food apocalypse on prices. Well, that's Northern Ireland is very much a part of that. It's only 3% of the UK, but it produces up to 20% of the food that comes into the UK, especially in around dairy and chicken. Now, you can imagine if goods are coming into Northern Ireland and it's taking more checks to get them in, those raw materials are coming in here to be produced into our food and then brought back to Britain. Well, that cost is coming across one way and it's going to go back again back into the UK market. So that needs to be addressed. He's also looking in this legislation and stuff in around the ECJ, European Courts of Justice, where they would stand. I think Britain wants them to be just overlooking anything to do with Europe. So that's all causing problems in and around the protocol. Richie Neal, the very powerful senator who looks after the Ways and Means Commission, is in Dublin today. Now, this is the senator that really says who can and cannot get trade deals with America, and he's very much an Irish American. That could cause problems for Boris Johnson. But also today, Liz Truss is expected to make a statement on legacy, the constant trooping back of soldiers and security forces to courts to face prosecution, and not one of them has ever been prosecuted. That type of legislation is coming in today as well. That was probably discussed yesterday with the parties, and that may explain a lot of the aggravation in and around Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin, of course, very, very eager to take power here in Northern Ireland because they see elections in the south, and if they can take power here and it's acceptable here, it may be seen as acceptable in the south.
Doogie, thank you so much for that. That is our Northern Ireland correspondent, Doogie Beattie, there.
Now, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall are travelling to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee tour.
Yeah, our royal reporter Cameron Walker is travelling to Canada for the tour and sent us a sneak preview of what we can expect.
The next generation of Canadians proudly waved their national flag, welcoming Charles and Camilla to their High Commission ahead of the royal tour. These are the children many fear who'll have to live with the consequences of climate change. The Prince of Wales believes we need to take better care of our planet, and his status as heir to the throne, Canada's High Commissioner to Britain believes, can champion change.
Prince Charles plays an important role in the world in catalyzing action around climate change. He can be very influential in getting governments and businesses focused and committed.
Parts of Canada's northwest are experiencing heavy flooding for a second year in a row, and Prince Charles and Camilla will hear firsthand how it's impacting Indigenous communities. The royal couple will travel more than 2,000 miles across the country, also spending time in Newfoundland and the country's capital, Ottawa. But Canada's past could come back to haunt them. Protesters toppled statues of Her Majesty the Queen and Queen Victoria last year over the discovery of unmarked graves of Indigenous children who were sent to residential schools in the 19th and 20th centuries. Meeting members of the Indigenous community will form a big part of the visit, perhaps with a view to avoid similar protests experienced by other members of the royal family on recent tours to the Caribbean. The Queen hasn't visited Canada since 2010. Problems with her movement means Charles is having to take on more of her workload. Richard Bethelson, who's helped organise past royal tours of Canada, suggests Charles should use this opportunity to connect with Canadians.
There is an ongoing kind of debate that's growing about the future of the monarchy as we do approach the end of this reign. People will be looking at Prince Charles and I think really assessing whether they can see him as the next King of Canada.
Prince Charles's great-grandfather, King George V, officially opened Canada House in London almost 100 years ago. It serves as a unique showcase for Canada's culture. The royal couple's visit to the Canadian High Commission was about celebrating Canadians in Britain. This week's trip is about celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in a country that shares her crown. Cameron Walker, GB News, London.
Well, joining us now for more on this is the royal broadcaster and commentator Jenny Bond. Very good morning to you, Jenny.
Morning.
So, listen, we've heard Canada described this morning by one guest as the world capital of woke. Are they going into the lion's den a little bit with this tour?
Well, I don't know about being woke, but Canada certainly has been a very important part of the Commonwealth and remains so. And every member of the royal family makes frequent trips there. I think polls do suggest that the popularity of the monarchy is falling somewhat. The Queen remains very popular. But as your report suggested, I think at the change of the reign, when the Queen dies, there will be an acceleration in discussion, debate about whether it should become free of the Queen as head of state. It's going to be a tricky tour, no doubt. Every royal tour has its ups and downs and its bumps along the way. But I think on this occasion, they've made every effort to tick the boxes, if you like. There's a lot about the Indigenous reconciliation process and a lot about climate change.
Nothing, Jenny, that the royal family can do to rescue this situation, given you're saying that when the Queen goes, that there will be questions asked about whether it should turn into a republic, and given that the government in Canada has been kind of reducing the length of time that these royal tours take place and the frequency of them.
Well, Canada actually remains, as I say, extremely important, and they do go there a lot. But this is a very short tour, you're right. But then there's so much going on this Jubilee year. Jubilee tours are different because it's not just a regular tour sanctioned and demanded, really required by the Foreign Office. This is to celebrate the Queen. And now that we haven't got Prince Andrew, obviously, or Prince Harry doing royal duties, they are fairly thin on the ground, senior royals. So 3 days will hardly touch the sides of Canada. Cameron said they're going to travel 2,000 miles. Well, I've been to Canada. I was there with the Queen for the Golden Jubilee, and it is a vast country. But I think one of the most poignant events will be when they go to a garden called the Heart Garden for prayers and reflection on the horrors of these residential schools that Cameron spoke about. Sorry.
No, sorry, I thought you'd finished speaking and I was just agreeing about the horrors, but do tell us more.
Well, in the late 1800s and into the 1900s, there were residential schools, boarding schools set up all over Canada, partly by the church and also by state. And Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their homes and taken to these schools. And there they were told they couldn't speak their language, they were divorced from their culture. You could almost say they were brainwashed, I suppose. But beyond that, they were physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, they were malnourished, disease was rife, and thousands of them died. And as was discovered last year, buried in unmarked graves, which provoked a lot of outrage, obviously, and the toppling of those statues. So there's a lot to be reconciled, which is what it's called, but already there are calls for more than an acknowledgement of what went on. But one Indian chief has said that the royal family and Prince Charles should apologise. So this could be bumpy.
Yeah, it could be bumpy, and there have been, a few protests in recent weeks, as we saw in the Caribbean with the recent royal tours there. So do you predict then that there could be a few awkward moments for the Prince of Wales?
There probably will be some awkward moments, but I've been on dozens and dozens of royal tours, and there aren't very many that don't have an awkward moment. The Queen herself has had protests and even eggs thrown at her, some, I think, in Canada, certainly in New Zealand. But in Canada, yes, there have been protests against the Queen. Every royal tour has its moments, but on balance, the pictures and the true story will be hundreds and thousands of people who like the monarchy, appreciate the monarchy, turning out to wave those flags.
Jenny Bond, always lovely to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to see Jenny there. It is 8:18. Let's bring you up to date with what else is happening this morning. More than 260 Ukrainian servicemen have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol after an 82-day assault by Russia. The steel plant has become a symbol of resistance throughout the war. In an address late last night, President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "We need our heroes alive."
The Foreign Secretary is set to announce plans to rip up parts of the UK's post-Brexit trade deal on Northern Ireland. Liz Truss is expected to announce bringing forward legislation in the Commons today.
An LGBTQ+ football fan said they can't stop smiling after a Blackpool player became the first professional in the men's game to come out as gay in 30 years. Co-chair of Pride in Football, Joe White, has called it wonderful. 17-year-old Jake Daniels released a statement yesterday to say he's always known he's gay. He's the first UK male professional footballer to come out since Justin Fashanu in 1990. Now, more than 260 soldiers have been evacuated from the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol following an 82-day Russian assault.
Yes, Ukraine's military command announced the decision to abort the defence plans, thanking the heroes of our time, in his words, and they also reiterated their commitment to rescue servicemen who are still trapped.
Meanwhile, Finland and Sweden have announced that they will apply to join NATO in response to the Russian invasion.
For more, let's speak to the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of European and NATO Policy, Michael Ryan. Very good morning to you, Michael. First of all, your reaction to this developing story that we've seen overnight of Ukrainian heroes, as President Zelensky has described them, being safely removed from the horrors of that Azovstal steel plant, but taken to Russian-controlled areas. Lots of tense moments still to come, and indeed many unknown numbers of soldiers remain in the steel plant. But we never expected really even to see these sorts of pictures, did we?
No, that's exactly right, Isabel. It is great news. They are heroes of Ukraine. They have amazed the world with their courage and their tenacity, and it is great to see them come out of there. As you said, though, it's still a tense situation that will continue.
See it playing out, Michael?
Well, the Mariupol pocket, if you will, is a strategic position that the Russians need if they want to build a land bridge all the way across southern Ukraine so that they can then support their forces in Crimea and their situation in Crimea. Therefore, symbolically, it demonstrates the tenacity of the Ukrainian defense, but strategically, the Russians need Mariupol, and they need to be seen as completely controlling it. So the soldiers who are holding out in the steel plant there are really stalling anything that the Russians want to do and really energizing the Ukrainian defense right across Ukraine. So it is strategically important, but it's great to see these guys come out.
Yeah, and we've heard overnight that there were suggestions there was nothing more defensively that the soldiers could do from within Mariupol, and a lot of them expected to die there. But as I was saying in my first question to you, lots of them in Russian-controlled areas, and the hope is, and President Zelensky saying this, that there could be some sort of swap taking place. But he wants them, specifically has said, we want our heroes to be sent back alive. How much of a transactional thing is this going to be? And, how much can the Russians be relied upon to act in good faith in this situation?
Well, yes, Isabel, you're absolutely right. It is transactional. The whole situation in the war in Ukraine is very dynamic, as each side tries to improve their position on the ground so that they can improve their negotiating position. I think this tells us that the Russians see a need to start to build some goodwill. They have been sort of digging in for the long haul in the areas which they've already taken, knowing that the Ukrainians are going to counterattack them significantly once they get a refreshed set of Western weapons. And therefore, the Russians are trying to build some goodwill. They're trying to demonstrate things that they haven't demonstrated in the past, and that they are going to abide by the rules of war. And so I would expect that there will be a prisoner swap. The Ukrainians have a significant number of Russian prisoners. The Russians would not be able to argue away in the style of propaganda that they're used to what would happen to these soldiers if they're not brought back alive. And so I would definitely see a transactional prisoner swap that at a time when Russia sees it in their interest to do so.
Yeah. Sweden and Finland are applying to join NATO. Can you just talk us through how long that application takes, what it involves, and what do you think the considerations should be with regards to Russia's reaction?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very historic moment. It's an important step for both Finland and Sweden, but I have to emphasize it's merely a step. For almost the last 20 years, both nations have realized, based on the actions of the Russian Federation in Georgia and Ukraine previously and elsewhere in the world, that their national security is best served by joining the alliance. They didn't make the decision to join until recently, but they did everything up to the point of becoming a member. They're very close militarily, they're very close politically, they're very, very aligned with the NATO position. They are members of the European Union. And so they've been moving along this direction in case it was needed based on a changing global situation. This global situation has now changed, both through a very deliberate and very thorough democratic process have made the decision to apply for membership. What will happen is, as soon as their application is received, they will actually start attending NATO meetings as observers so that they get up to speed, they get fully integrated in the conversation. They won't have the right to vote until all 30 members of the alliance approve their application, because it is a treaty-based organization, and therefore all members need to approve it through their parliaments. They've been very welcome so far. The only obstacle that has appeared, which is probably not going to be in the end an obstacle, is some Turkish opposition based on their view of Swedish support for the terrorists that the Turks are fighting in northern Syria.
So does that basically mean that they will all vote on that when they next meet, when there's the next NATO meeting, whenever that is?
Actually, the applications need to be approved in the parliaments of each of the 30 nations. That could take a while. It's probably going to go very quickly. I would anticipate that the U.S. Congress, which usually takes the longest or is near the end of the queue when it comes to voting on new members, will actually, because of the situation in Ukraine and the situation with Russia, move very quickly on this. So the U.S. Congress will approve the membership of Finland and Sweden, as will most other parliaments in NATO member countries, very quickly. Some, depending on their national procedures, may take longer. But I think Finland and Sweden will join very quickly. They'll be approved in the parliaments of all 30 nations quite rapidly. The Turks, who can be very transactional and who pursue their interests in just about every forum and do so diligently and aggressively, are really trying to get their pound of flesh because they see an opportunity to push some other agenda items in NATO. But in the end, consensus will be achieved. All the nations will discuss with the Turks the advantages of having Finland and Sweden, which are numerous, and the Turks will eventually come around and join consensus as well. So probably 6 to 10 months it will take for Finland and Sweden to become full members.
Still sounds quite a long time to me. Michael Ryan, really good to get your take this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Michael is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for European and NATO policy.
Yep. Coming up, from stress to getting hold of medication, the cost of living has had a significant effect on the state of our health. We'll be getting a doctor's advice on how to look after ourselves during the crisis after this.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Pretty warm one for some of us today, likely to be the warmest day of the year so far. Across parts of eastern England, 26, maybe 27 degrees Celsius. Further west, things are not so straightforward. Low pressure is here and this weather front is slowly trickling in. That's going to bring some clouds and some outbreaks of rain at times to Northern Ireland, westernmost fringes of Wales, and later on today, western Scotland and the far southwest of England. Quite misty and murky around the coast of northeast Scotland, and again here it's going to suppress the temperatures, but for many places it's dry and fine, hazy sunshine, and it is warm out there as well. Temperatures ticking up steadily through the day, so across the Midlands to eastern England, 23 in Hull and Birmingham, 26 in London, maybe 27 in one or two locations, whereas Belfast 15 or 16 with the cloud and the rain moving in here, which could be quite heavy this evening across western areas. At the same time, the warmth and humidity over France could trigger some thunderstorms which may drift northwards across East Anglia and the southeast. So potential for some quite heavy rain during this evening. But it does all tend to scoot away, and most places, again, become dry through the early hours. Temperatures holding up in double figures in most towns and cities. And again, Wednesday will, by and large, be a fine day. There will, again, be a bit of mist here and there early on, and there will be a few showers to come in, particularly parts of western Scotland. But a brighter day for Northern Ireland and West Wales. Again, quite breezy, but generally another fine warm day, perhaps not quite as warm as today, but we should still get temperatures quite widely over 20 Celsius across England and Wales, and a warmer day for Northern Ireland, as I mentioned, probably 24, 25 the peak. However, further south, again, the potential for some thunderstorms through Wednesday evening. Some heavy downpours are possible across parts of England. We'll be keeping a close eye on that.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 8:31. Still to come on this morning's programme. The clock is ticking on Julian Assange's defence submission as the former WikiLeaks founder faces extradition. We'll be speaking to the current WikiLeaks editor as a planned protest is due to take place later today. That's in around 20 minutes' time.
And coming up after 9, as the Wagatha Christie trial continues, former WAG Lizzie Cundy tells us about her, I hate that word, tells us about her friendship with Colleen Rooney as she continues to battle Rebecca Vardy in court.
And remember, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews, gbnews.uk.
Yeah, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
OK, well, with the time at 8:31 still, we're going to bring you up to date on the latest headlines. And more than 260 Ukrainian servicemen have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister Anna Maliar says 53 are injured and were taken to hospital. All of the evacuees will now be subject to an exchange.
The Foreign Secretary is set to announce plans to rip up parts of the UK's post-Brexit trade deal on Northern Ireland. Liz Truss is expected to bring forward legislation in the Commons today. More than half of people across the UK say their health is getting worse because of the rising cost of living. A YouGov poll shows 84% said their health is getting worse due to increasing heating costs, and 78% cited the rising cost of food. 1 in 4 had been told by a doctor that stress is a driving factor of their ill health. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment.
And the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall are heading off to Canada today and will reflect on victims of a school scandal there when the tour begins a little bit later on. Charles and Camilla will visit a garden that's dedicated to Indigenous children who are forced into Canadian society, and it saw thousands of them abused or killed. It kicks off a 3-day trip around the Commonwealth country as part of Canada's Platinum Jubilee celebrations.
So let's talk a little bit more about that study that shows the cost of living crisis, which has had an immense impact on our health.
Yes, so a poll commissioned by the Royal College of Physicians found that 55% feel that their health has deteriorated due to soaring food bills and higher heating costs.
Yeah, in fact, medics are reporting that some patients cannot afford to look after themselves. Dr. Frankie Jackson-Spence is here with us now. Thanks for joining us, Frankie. First of all, we're talking about holistic, all-round health here, physical health and mental health.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. I think, where to start with this. The cost of living crisis can affect a person's mental and physical health in so many ways. When we talk about how it can affect someone's physical health, the rising costs of heating is going to become a problem in the winter. People, particularly with lung conditions like asthma and COPD, not being able to heat your home properly can contribute to damp, which can make symptoms of these conditions worse. Rising food bills is going to be a big one. Diet does play a big role in our wider health, and I think people will cut costs on food shopping to be able to pay for things like their utility bills.
And on that, I just wanted to talk about it because, we're not going to suddenly see a nation, we think of sort of famine pictures and people with bones protruding. I mean, people are going to be foregoing food, but they'll be substituting it with cheap stuff that fills them up. And we'll actually probably see an increase in obesity, would you predict, and the associated health risks, so whether that's heart disease or cancer.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of a misconception, actually, that eating healthily has to cost more money. Often cooking from scratch, from fruits and vegetables, can actually be cheaper than a takeaway, but people don't often realise that or have the means to cook a healthy meal. And I think another important fact is also the rising travel costs. I've had some patients of my own express concerns to me already about, the rising cost of travel to get to their cancer appointments, to attend scans. Some of these patients are coming to hospital really frequently. So I think that is another implication on a person's health as well.
Well, you're seeing hospitals imposing car parking for patients as well, many hospitals for the first time. And as you say, people going for oncology treatment always just really jars, doesn't it, during a cost of living crisis, that the sick should have to pay to park their car to go in for essential life-saving treatment. I honestly, it's one of the biggest bugbears that I have, and I really don't understand why people should have to pay for that.
Yeah, what do you make about the government delaying its ban on advertising junk food and on the buy one get one frees for a year? They've come in for a lot of criticism on that. Do you think that is legitimate?
I think it's really important that we promote healthy eating behaviours. I actually think that strategies would be better to promote healthy behaviours rather than kind of putting a negative spin on poor eating behaviours. So I actually think the emphasis should be on teaching people and educating people why good nutrition is important and how you do that, rather than making it more expensive to eat unhealthily.
And on cooking, because the MP Lee Anderson, he got a lot of stick for suggesting that people should learn how to cook and learn how to budget last week. Do you think that was maybe he didn't make that point in the right way, but did you think that was a legitimate point to make?
I think it's important that young people are taught the importance of nutrition from a young age. So it's not necessarily saying a blanket statement that people need to learn how to cook, but understanding why food's important, different food groups, and how we can eat healthily is a really complicated issue. But I think education is probably the key thing here, rather than actually just making eating unhealthy more expensive.
And just really quickly, because we are out of time, but I just want to talk about how to manage stress, because that is what drives not only mental health, but so many other things. Yesterday on the programme, we were talking about the links between stress and Alzheimer's.
Yeah, so stress can have a massive impact on a person's health. Stress itself can cause physiological changes to the body. You can release stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, which, if prolonged high levels over a long period, can contribute to high blood pressure and the development of health conditions like heart disease, strokes, that kind of thing. So I think it's actually a really important thing to tackle early. I think some tips for people, I can't take away their stressor here. This is going to stay for a while. But having some tools to help manage your stress and cope on a daily basis can be helpful. So recognising your signs of stress early, perhaps you start eating unhealthy or start smoking more or not getting enough sleep.
Drinking more.
Exactly. Recognising those early to start to do something about it. Exercise is one that I would really advocate for, and people really underestimate the effects of exercise. Not only does exercise release endorphins, which makes you feel good and often can help you tackle the day and your stress better, but actually exercise can counteract some of those negative health changes that stress can have, such as raising your blood pressure. Exercise can counteract that. Really quickly, sleep hygiene, also really important. Sleep is often one of the first things to go when we're stressed, and that saying about getting a good night's sleep really actually runs true for your health.
Yeah.
And the last point is talking to someone. This is a crisis, meaning we're all going through this. And just like we did in the pandemic, sometimes sharing your problems and knowing you're not the only one going through this can actually help you cope and manage. It doesn't seem quite as bad. And on that note, speaking to your GP to see if there's anything in your local community that can help support you and manage your stress and mental health worries as well.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you, Frankie. Thank you. Dr. Frankie Jackson-Spence there. With some tips on how to survive the cost of living crisis, which is going to be a big story throughout the day. The Chancellor's talking to the Commons later about possible measures, more measures that they may introduce to try and help with the increasing cost of living crisis.
Health warning, though, if you want to manage your stress, you might not want to stick around for what's next. We've got the papers with Martin Daubney and Amy Cameron. We normally have a bit of a ding-dong. It's worth a watch, but if you're worried about stress, perhaps not for you. See you in a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're watching GB News Breakfast. Good to have you with us this morning. It is 8:41. Time to go through the papers. An entertaining read through the papers. Not with the health warning that you alluded to before. But it is interesting to see different views. That's why we do
get
it,
the
don't
pulse
we?
racing. Yeah, the Deputy Leader of the Reclaim Party, Martin Daubney, is joining us again, and the environmental campaigner, Amy Cameron. Never a dull moment with these two. Martin, you've chosen a story, page 8 of The Times this morning, and this is about migrants being sent to Yorkshire in the coming weeks, despite, and I quote, residents' anger at this.
Yeah, I think it's an important story to keep focusing on because as we're obsessing with the cost of living crisis, quite rightly, illegal immigration, the huge arrivals into the country is something which is omnipresent. In fact, when Priti Patel threw out the red meat of Rwanda, which I think was designed to distract, it's going to be unworkable. In fact, on the same page in today's Times, Boris Johnson's own refugees minister has refused to endorse the Rwanda policy. And meanwhile, people who arrive at the coastal ports of Britain are quietly foisted upon communities much further afield. And Linton on Ouse in Yorkshire is a classic example of what's going on here. It's a small village of 750 occupants, which has found itself without any process of public consultation whatsoever, the recipient of a 1,500-strong migrant processing centre on a disused airfield. And they are rightly concerned about this, I think. They weren't consulted, they had no say in the matter, and the occupants will be free to walk around the village. There's a 10 p.m. curfew. They're rightly saying, what about safety? What about crime? These are very ordinary concerns. And I think this is indicative of we're doing some work at the Reclaim Party into where the asylum seekers are actually sent, and it's into the four corners of Britain, and it's not in the areas where liberal commentators live. It's not in the areas where the refugees welcome people seem to live, in the metropolitan leafy areas. It's in working class communities, it's in rural areas like this, strong Leave voters, safe Conservative seat. And I think this is politically a huge story, and it's one we must keep talking about, because we're spending £5 million a day on hotels alone in the UK. And the answer is to try and take back control of our borders, something that we voted for repeatedly at every election from Brexit onwards. And instead, we're finding, communities like Linton on Ouse being dumped upon, and it's not fair.
Yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson stood on that very slogan, didn't he, taking back control of our borders? But it's been proven, hasn't it, that Brexit hasn't made that possible. So how do you think that it could be possible?
Well, quite simply, we didn't leave the European Court of Human Rights. Now, that was one thing that should have been immovable. So it still ties it into the legal orbit, and it still creates a feeding frenzy for the human rights lawyers who will do everything they can to stop Rwanda, and they will be powerless in Linton to stop this. And I think this will be the first of many where we are simply unable to control our borders under current law, and therefore they're disseminated to the four corners of Britain onto the public who have no say.
Amy, should the residents of Linton be worried?
I don't think the residents of Linton should be worried. I do always agree that community consultation is absolutely key when you're implementing any changes in someone's community. And I think what this headline and what the tenor of the media conversation around migration fails to reflect is that actually post-Brexit, support for migrant rights has never been higher. There was a sense pre-Brexit that we didn't have control. It was not necessarily a reflection of anti-migrant sentiment. And I think we've seen that especially with the response of the British public to the Ukrainian crisis, where actually the generosity of British people has far outweighed the response from the Home Office. So we're in a situation where actually we know that when British people are given an opportunity to, they are not just willing to host people in their communities, they're willing to host them in their homes.
Some people say when it's Ukrainian women and children.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's necessarily a tested theory. I'm actually surprised that Martin, of all people, is kind of playing into this narrative that men are inherently dangerous. The reason that so many of the men come across is because of the huge dangers of the journeys that they attempt as they flee persecution, war, discrimination, etc. What's an incredibly boring response is to say that the UK needs an orderly, effective and humane migration system, which processes claims within 6 months. What we see is that the majority of refugee claims in the UK are successful in the first instance. Of those that aren't, on appeals, a further 50% are successful. That means that the vast majority of people who come to these shores are legitimate refugees who are fleeing crises like Ukraine. And if there are a small number who are not, then they should be processed effectively.
Statistically, that is the case. Two-thirds of those who apply for asylum are granted it, albeit after a lengthy process in expensive hotels.
The data supports the fact that the huge majority of people arriving illegally to our shores are economic migrants who have passed through several other safe countries first. France is not a war zone. They're coming from France, and they come through many countries to get. They're coming to Britain for a better life. Now, if we think it's our duty to give the world a better life economically, we may as well do away with passports, do away with borders, do away with any controls whatsoever. The entire Brexit debate wasn't, I agree with you, it wasn't about being anti-immigration at all. It was about controlling the numbers and the speed of arrival. This, 1,500 in one go, onto a village of 750 is the perfect example of how wrong-headed it is. It's going to treble the population of the village
but where
overnight.
should they go? Because they're here. There is no legal transport method. There is no process for them to come in via.
Well, the government haven't got
what do you do with these people that are coming in? The
government haven't got any ideas for how to stop the arrivals in the first place. The French don't want to work with the UK. The French are quite happy to see the back of people leaving their shores. And we can't turn them around in the Channel. Instead, we're ferrying them ashore, and we can see record numbers. 500 came to Dover alone at the weekend on ships, border force ships, that are meant to control our borders, but instead act as a taxi service. It's a shambles.
I just think it's super interesting because you refer to this kind of illegal migration. The reason that people are making these incredibly dangerous journeys is because we've shut down the vast majority of safe and legal routes. And just to pick you up on that point around flooding from France, very, very few people who enter the EU as migrants actually carry on to the UK. It's about 10%. So the number of migrants and refugees who are hosted in other European countries massively dwarfs Britain. I think the vast majority of people, like with Ukraine, would recognise that Britain does have a role to play in housing people who are fleeing persecution.
You're comparing apples and pears. One is a war zone. That's the Ukraine.
Many of these people are also fleeing war zones. And
the ones arriving here, the huge majority, are economic migrants. These are the facts. And every single one of these people going to Linton-on-Ouse will be single males. There are no women and children. So how would you feel if 1,500 men were dumped on your doorstep in a village of 750? How would that make you feel? You would have legitimate concerns to raise a protest about it. That's the point. They weren't consulted, they weren't given a voice, and now they're being told that they're racist for objecting.
No, I was going to say, this is a big debate, and we just don't have any more time for it, I'm afraid. but
we've got so much to say.
Yeah, we've got so much to say. Just very quickly, Amy, because Martin was talking about a story that he picked out of the Times. Do you want to talk about the cost of living, windfall tax, or Wagatha Christie?
Oh, gosh, so many choices. I think let's quickly talk about windfall tax and cost of living together. Because I think they're the same story, effectively, right? What we're seeing is government ministers and Conservative MPs repeatedly showing just a level of ignorance about the situation that people in this country are in that is frankly staggering. So we had a minister yesterday, she's being made to do the rounds again today to atone for her sins, Sarah McLean, saying that people should be working more hours or getting new jobs. I think what this speaks to is how little comprehension so many of our elected officials and those in government have of the day-to-day challenges that people in the UK are facing. So to segue smoothly on, something like a windfall tax, which is actually increasingly supported cross-party and definitely has public support, would be an effective mechanism that the government could implement to alleviate some of the pressure on working families.
Final thought. We're almost out of time, but just in response to that?
Yeah, I think a windfall tax is a short-term solution to a longer-term problem. and it will deter investment into the UK. We can't alter our corporation tax, which is much more beneficial by cutting it. We need to cut taxes on ordinary working people in terms of VAT, green levies. Imposing more tax is a very left-wing idea. It's now become a mainstream idea, and Tories have put the biggest taxes on us since World War II. We voted for Boris and we got Corbyn.
OK, we have to leave it there. Martin Daubney, Amy Cameron. I promised that it would get people going. The inbox is live and kicking after that. Thank you both very much for taking us through the papers this morning. It's been a pleasure.
GB Views at gbnews.uk. It is 8:51. Let's bring you up to date with what else is happening this morning. The Home Secretary, for one, expected to give special constables the powers to use tasers. She'll be speaking at the Police Federation conference in Manchester. Priti Patel will say she is giving approval for volunteer police officers to carry the weapons if chief officers authorise it.
Rents are nearly £100 a month higher on average than 1 year ago. That's according to property website Zoopla. The average UK monthly rent was £995 in the first quarter of the year. That's an increase of 11% from £97 a year ago. It's citing rental growth being driven by high rental demand and limited supply.
The Earl of Wessex will board a train at Paddington Station today, marking the completion of London's Crossrail project, Europe's biggest infrastructure project, I believe. Edward will meet the PM and the Mayor of London, as well as key staff in the project. The line, named after his mother, the Queen, will open to the public on the 24th of May.
Now, how many years have we been talking about the issue of Julian Assange? Well, today is the deadline for appeals to be submitted to the Home Secretary in his case as she prepares to make a decision on whether or not to extradite the WikiLeaks founder to the United States.
Yeah, a demonstration in support of Assange will take place this evening outside the Home Office. We can speak now to the editor-in-chief at WikiLeaks, Kristin Hrafnsson. Kristin, good morning. Thank you for joining us. First of all, how do you feel the decision is going to go?
I'm hoping for the best, that Priti Patel will do the right thing. There are so many reasons to support that decision to block the extradition.
OK, so behind the scenes today, lots of legal documents will be prepared, submitted to the Home Office today ahead of that decision, which could be in the next fortnight or so. What is the legal case to try and prevent Assange from being extradited?
Well, I mean, there are so many arguments there. To start with the obvious, the extradition treaty between the US and the UK specifically prohibits extradition on the basis of accusation of a political act. So we are seeing this indictment against Julian on the basis of the Espionage Act. So he is, however ridiculous it is to equate journalism with espionage, it is a political offence, an alleged political offence. So that in itself should stop it. There are many other reasons. Priti Patel could look to the arguments that the magistrate court looked to, which was the health reasons, that Julian's health was simply so bad that he would not be able to withstand the conditions in the US jails. And that was overturned in the High Court. So you could look to the example that Theresa May took 10 years ago when her predecessor, when she stopped the extradition of Gary McKinnon on health grounds. So, I mean, and then of course we could get to the obvious. It is simply a reputational issue. The United Kingdom is trying to raise its profile as guardians of press freedom around the world. It is, of course, unacceptable that a journalist has been sitting in Belmarsh prison, probably the longest-serving remand prisoner in this country in the latter times, and to extradite him as a result of this political persecution is unacceptable, and it will be a stain on the reputation of the United Kingdom.
But the American government says that those leaks that he is responsible for have endangered lives.
They have said so, but they have not provided any proof. And on the contrary, they have had to admit under oath in a court-martial of Chelsea Manning that there was no physical harm resulted in the publication of these documents.
What about Julian Assange's alleged links to Russia in all of this? How much will that be a factor?
It is not a factor in the indictment against him. He's being indicted for exposing war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we should be understanding the importance of that as a journalistic feat. We are now actually putting pressure on journalists and asking them to expose and gather evidence of war crimes in the current conflict in the Ukraine, because it's extremely important. That is one of the most important role of journalists to bear witness in conflicts, especially so people can be brought to justice who commit war crimes. That is the so-called crime of Julian Assange, to commit journalism.
Yeah, but what about when that infringes on national security?
Yeah, is there a limit to that?
There has been no argument. Of course, there are limits to what can be published, and that has always been the policy of WikiLeaks, to put a limit of that. But let's just look at the obvious thing here. What WikiLeaks did and Julian did in 2010, which is the basis of the indictment against him, is cause an embarrassment to the empire. That is not a crime. Journalists who are brought to trial because they cause an embarrassment to a regime, that we don't call that a normal practice in a democratic society.
And you mentioned his health. How is it?
His health has been declining, and of course doctors have witnessed on his behalf in the extradition proceedings here, and it has not been disputed. And if you look at the fact that he has been deprived of freedom for more than 10 years and has now spent 3 years, or more than 3 years, most of the time in isolation in Belmarsh prison, a non-violent individual in Belmarsh prison. I mean, there is no justice in that.
And may I ask you what you perceive to be the difference between the 7 years of isolation or hiding in the Ecuadorian embassy and then the 3 years in the Belmarsh prison? How will that differ from the treatment you expect that he would receive in the United States if he was extradited?
Well, I mean, it is obvious that he will be put in isolation and in pre-trial detention in the US. And after he is tried and convicted, he's going to be convicted in a court in the US where there is a 96 or 7% conviction rate in similar cases. It's in Virginia. He will be put in possibly in a supermax prison or equivalent circumstances and total isolation for the rest of his life. And the High Court, when it's overturned the Magistrate Court decision here in this country, they were basing that on so-called assurances by the United States, which is absurd. At a later stage, when they have lost the Magistrate Court proceedings, they come up with a document, the so-called diplomatic assurances, that they would treat Julian fairly and not put him in so-called special administrative measure, which is basically another name for torture and isolation. But it is not worth the paper it's written on. That was the decision. That was the finding of Amnesty International, who read through it, because actually in that so-called assurances is a clause saying that the U.S. retains the right to actually impose it at a later stage if they deem that necessary. So it is everything but any assurances. So we are hoping for the best, and I believe that this administration, with Boris Johnson being a former journalist, you should understand that the journalism aspect of this is very important, and Priti Patel should do as well.
We'll have to leave it there, but thank you for speaking to us. Really appreciate it.
Come back and talk to us when there is a judgment. Let us know your assessment on all of that. It'd be lovely to see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back at the top of the next hour. See you in a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The Commons will debate a windfall tax on energy companies as the boss of the Bank of England warns of apocalyptic food prices.
Good morning. It's just gone 9 o'clock on Tuesday, the 17th of May. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel and Paul, and this is what is leading the news this morning.
The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will face the House of Commons today as it debates the cost of living crisis. Labour is expected to use the debate to force a vote on a windfall tax that it says could give struggling families £600.
It comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, blamed the war in Ukraine for the highest inflation in decades and warned that, in his words, apocalyptic food prices could be devastating for the poor.
More than 260 Ukrainian soldiers have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, many to Russian-controlled areas. In an address last night, Ukrainian President Zelensky said, "We need our heroes returned alive."
And Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall will fly to Canada today as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee tour. The Prince of Wales's visit is part of a series of trips by senior royals to Commonwealth countries on behalf of the monarch.
And remember, you can join in any of our discussions on the programme by emailing us, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
Yeah, and don't forget you can subscribe to the GB News channel on YouTube to get all the latest on the big stories everyone is talking about.
Well, to our top story this hour, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak is to face Parliament later today as the Commons debates tackling the short-term and long-term implications of the cost of living increases.
It's part of the Queen's speech debate, and Labour is expected to use it to force a vote on a windfall tax for energy companies that they say could give struggling families £600 a year.
Well, this comes after the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, told the Treasury Select Committee that apocalyptic food prices could have a disastrous impact on the poor. He also said that the war in Ukraine was to blame for the worst inflation in 3 decades.
The debate in the Commons on the cost of living comes in the wake of controversial comments by Tory Minister Rachel Maclean, who suggested that people could protect themselves from the cost of living crisis by working more hours or moving to a higher paid job. This is how she responded when we asked her about those comments on the programme yesterday.
Remarks that I made about people taking on more hours are part of our plan to help people get back into work. We've got a very good record of helping people get back into work after the COVID crisis, and also to enable them to, if they want to, and it's right for them, to...
Well, that was Rachel Maclean speaking to us yesterday. But now we're joined in the studio by Vanity Fair's royal editor, Katie Nicholl, of course, here to talk about all the stories of the day, indeed all the big royal issues. But just a quick word on this cost of living crisis that all of us are facing. Of course, look, you know, there's lots of pressure on the government to do something about this, and hearing from the Governor of the Bank of England yesterday, really sobering, talking about apocalyptic food prices.
Well, I think when you hear the Governor of the Bank of England saying that, you just think, well, what hope for the rest of us? And it's all very well hearing this advice about not asking for a pay rise. Well, he told us he hadn't, OK, but, you know, the cost of living is going up. It's very hard for a lot of people to not ask for a pay rise. I mean, the first email I woke up to this morning was, right, there's going to be a surge in your energy tariff. I think the measures to introduce tariff updates 4 times a year is helpful for people. It's going to be very interesting to see the result of this proposal for the windfall tax. I think a lot of people feel quite strongly that if the energy companies are taking so much, then surely some of that needs to be passed on to the consumer. But I think it's just very concerning times for everybody.
Yeah, there's certainly a sort of tense mood, isn't there, just amongst not just the public, but for the government, the pressure on the Bank of England. And we just look at the global picture as well, everything that's happening in Ukraine sort of feeding into this.
Well, that's obviously had an impact. Of course it has. We've heard a lot about that this morning. We know that the pandemic's had a huge impact. The number of people working from home. Telegraph have carried an interesting poll about London being absolutely... We are leading still on the working from home. We're behind Berlin, Tokyo, New York. Now, is that because our travel rates are so much more expensive? It's actually cheaper for people to be working from home, and yet we've got the government telling us we need you back in the office. Something has to be done.
Yeah, and I think that's the big question. That often when the government says it's going to do something, it does something, and then often the comeback is it's not enough. So you were talking about the windfall tax there, but a lot of people are raising questions about whether that would actually raise enough money anyway.
So what is it, £600? I mean, is £600 going to make enough of a difference to people? Not when the rates are going through the roof.
Well, meanwhile, we've all got the Platinum Jubilee to look forward to, and goodness me, don't we need something to celebrate? That being said, I give with one hand and take with the other. This royal tour for the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, quite a short trip. And their first stop, quite sobering as well.
It is a short trip. It's only 3 days. I mean, usually when we go on these tours, it's sort of 7-8 days. Canada, they tend to get a good reception. Now, the Prince of Wales, I think he's been there 17 times. This is going to be the Duchess of Cornwall's 5th visit. They haven't been for 5 years. There are going to be some sober and humbling elements to this tour. Part of it is about a harmonious relationship with the Indigenous community. And we know there have been problems. We saw the statues toppled last year. We know there are tensions there. I think, as we saw when the Prince of Wales went to Barbados to see it decommissioned, he does have a very sensitive touch. He does seem to be very much in touch with the people that he's visiting. So I don't think he's going to shy away from any difficult issues. I think he will address them. I think you're going to see compassion and sensitivity. I think when they move to Ottawa, you're going to see a really positive reception. Every time I've been to Ottawa with the Royals, the flags are out, the royal fans are there. But I think what's interesting is they're not avoiding those Indigenous communities. This is about how to work better with them. And I think a big spotlight being on climate change and, you know, future generations.
What we've been hearing from royal commentators all morning is that the mood towards the monarchy in Canada has been dropping over the years. You've got a government in power that isn't particularly, not unfriendly to the monarchy, but just isn't really fussed about the ties between the monarchy and Canada, and that really once the Queen goes, it could start a process whereby Canada starts to think carefully about its relationship with the monarchy. Maybe it doesn't need the monarchy.
Well, I think these are conversations that are not just happening in Canada. They're happening in Commonwealth countries around the world. I mean, that recent poll is interesting, isn't it? That 51% felt that the country should not remain a monarchy in coming generations. And more concerningly for Charles, 34% support the idea of keeping a constitutional monarchy under his rule. That's only 34%. I think it's inevitable as we approach this Jubilee with an ageing monarch, we are going to be having these conversations, not just here in Britain about the future of the monarchy, but around the Commonwealth. You do speak to Canadians. They love that affiliation with the Crown. They will be waving their flags. They'll be out there for the Jubilee celebrations. Then you'll speak to perhaps a younger demographic who wonder why we need to have a monarchy. But I would argue that you might speak to a similar demographic here and they might ask the same question.
It's funny, the blurring, though, isn't there, between the monarchy and we all have this affection for the Queen, sort of the world's grandma, if you will. But the monarchy is an institution. You know, once the Queen dies, the King will be Prince Charles. Why does the affection necessarily have to go when the Queen goes?
Well, I don't necessarily think it will. Okay. I don't necessarily think it will. And I think sort of none of us are quite prepared for the sense of loss and shock and grief that we will feel when the Queen passes. And I think having Charles, who's been around for as long as any of us can remember as well, the longest-serving Prince of Wales, we may look to him for that continuity, for that reassurance. And you have to weigh it up against the alternative. Is there a real appetite for a republic here? Is there enough of an appetite for them to lose Charles as the next head of state in Canada? Not necessarily, but clearly these polls reflect a changing in mood. And I think the most important thing is that the monarchy is in touch with that and it's how they handle it, it's how they move forward and connect with the public.
I was going to say big shoes to fill for
Very much
for
so.
Prince Charles. It's a big challenge.
It is, but I think he is up for the challenge. And I think when you see him go out and do what he's going to do in Canada, it's not just about wanting to be the next head of state and continuity. He wants to make a difference. He wants to go and infiltrate those Indigenous communities, see how he can make a difference, work when it comes to climate change, and connect with young people, which is something he's always been amazing at doing. When you look at his work with the Prince's Trust, he has stayed relevant. I think there is a lot of respect for him, but inevitably this is a milestone moment that is going to cause this debate.
Well, he'll have William and Kate squarely behind him, won't he? And maybe
yes, he will.
see them as the sort of superstar future of the Crown. And,
yes.
we wish them well on their tour. Katie, always lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is 11 minutes past 9. Let's bring you up to date with what is happening this morning. More than 260 Ukrainian servicemen have been evacuated from the besieged Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. Many to Russian-controlled areas. Steel plant has become a symbol of resistance throughout the war. In an address late last night, President Volodymyr Zelensky said we need our heroes alive.
The Foreign Secretary is set to announce plans to rip up parts of the UK's post-Brexit trade deal on Northern Ireland. Liz Truss is expected to announce bringing forward legislation in the Commons today.
An LGBTQ+ football fan said they can't stop smiling after a Blackpool player became the first professional in the men's game to come out as gay in 30 years. 17-year-old Jake Daniels released a statement yesterday to say he's always known he's gay. He's the first UK male professional footballer to come out since Justin Fashanu in 1990.
Well, it's time now to go through all the top showbiz stories with Stephanie Tetchy. A very warm welcome to you, Stephanie. Should we just reflect, first of all, on that football story and how, a moment to sort of celebrate football progressing?
It is, because I think for years, within the media industry and within the newspaper industry, it's always been well known that there are quite a few gay footballers who haven't come out. And it's always been a waiting game to see who's going to be the first footballer to come out. And now that this has happened, it's like a historic moment. And it's good, actually, to see what the reaction has been from the football industry and the media industry, because there's been this whole big stereotype where people will feel like they won't be accepted. We're in 2022, come on now, keep up with the times. And it's nice to see that sports is now embracing this as well.
Yeah, the acid test will be if other footballers choose to come out, won't it?
I hope so. I hope it's the first of many.
OK, let's get stuck in then to the showbiz news. And talking of footballers or former footballers, David Beckham has been on social media. He's worth an absolute fortune, but he's been eating his tea of choice. Tell us more.
I know, David Beckham can eat at any restaurant in the world, Michelin stars, you name it, he's done it. But on Instagram, he showed that the most important meal, his favourite meal, is his mum's tea that he makes, that she's made for him. So it was a plate full of gammon, egg, pineapple, mushy peas and coleslaw, and he said it is his childhood favourite.
I love that. He's not too starry-eyed, that he's not in touch with his roots. And it looks like a very normal kitchen, the microwave firmly in place there and the ketchup on the table. We can all relate.
Oh, you know what? There's nothing like mum's cooking. I'm sorry, wherever you go in the world, you always have to come back and eat your mum's food. It's always nice.
You haven't eaten my mum's cooking.
Oh!
No, I'm only just joking. No, she's actually a very good cook, actually. And her granddaughter loves her curry.
Good.
There you go. David Beckham's eating coleslaw and Harry Styles is signing up to read bedtime stories in his pyjamas.
I know this is for CBeebies, but I actually watched the bedtime stories because they've been getting all these good names. Like the Duchess of Cambridge done it a few months ago, and that was good. So Harry's going to be the next celebrity to do it. He's going to be reading in every house on every street. It's by Jess Hitchman, and he'll be doing it next Monday. And he's going to be dressed in his pyjamas while doing it.
I mean, plenty of celebs have done it. I'm thinking of Tom Hardy and various other people that my children have watched, but they're normally clad in their normal gear. But Harry Styles wants to put his PJs on.
Well, he's become a bit of a fashionista recently, so I'm not surprised that he actually is going to be getting in his pyjamas, and much to the treat of the mums who will be there as well. So it'll be quite interesting, but I think it's such a good thing. I feel like now the CBeebies brand has become really cool with both adults as well and children.
Does Harry have any children? I can't keep up with
he hasn't. He's dating dating Olivia Nunn, who has children.
Oh, okay. He's a stepdaddy.
Yeah,
Olivia Wilde.
Yes, Olivia Wilde.
Amir Khan, recently retired Amir Khan, has talked about life after boxing.
Well, obviously, now he's retired, he's looking for the big money from I'm a Celeb. So he will be in the All-Stars edition, which was going to be in South Africa. He's been the first name to confirm. Usually ITV like to announce it, but he let it slip to the Sun newspaper. He'll be returning. So he starred in 2017. So this spin-off edition will be in South Africa, and it's getting some of the old names and faces that we've loved that have been in the show before, and he's one of them to confirm.
So really it should be called I'm a Celebrity and I'm back in here.
Yeah, to get more money.
To get more money. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, it should be exciting, but we've still got a long wait, so more than likely it will air next spring. But in the meantime, the annual show will be back this November, and they'll be heading back to Australia.
Do you know what I realised we should have talked about when we were talking about David Beckham, just to skip back a bit?
Yeah.
It's his wife, Victoria Beckham.
Oh, my God.
And her message that she's been putting out there about how thin or skinny's out of fashion, and hooray to that.
You know what, it's about time, because I remember, like, about 10 years ago when I used to pick up all the magazines and the skinny look was really in, and a lot of the celebrities were embracing it. Even Victoria, in this interview with Grazia, she said, you know, she used to be obsessed with kind of wanting to be. Oh, she says it's all changed, Isabel. She...
Not seeing much evidence of that.
She's saying now she wants to see women who are curvy wearing her dresses. She would say they will look best in it. And she's saying it's a bit of an old-fashioned attitude to want to be thin, and women should embrace their size, which is quite refreshing to hear from Victoria, because I know back in the day she used to get penalised quite a bit for her weight, and you know, now she's got her daughter Harper. She says it's also a good role model for women to embrace their weights, whatever size they are.
You're going to Cannes?
Yes, I am.
You have the best job.
I cannot wait. So Cannes kicks off today. So all of the celebrities will be heading to the French Riviera for the 75th edition of it. And it's going to be quite a big one. We've got lots of movies coming out, like Elvis, Baz Luhrmann's, that's going to be there. Forest Whitaker's going to be receiving the prestigious Lifetime Awards at the opening ceremony.
Yeah, quite rightly.
It will be Cannes back in full effect, because for the past 2 years it's been quite a quiet, subdued affair. So now the parties are going to be back on, full event, so it should be quite lively. But the celebrities have been warned to look after their jewellery.
Yeah,
because
it's got a history of high-profile jewellery heists at the Cannes Festival, not just at, in the hotels. Not just that, jewellers on the
there is
beachfront.
There's this gang called the Pink Panthers, and they stole up to...
You laugh, but they smoke people out.
They do.
Smoke people out?
Yeah, whilst they're sleeping.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that scary note.
Anyway, on the Pink Panther
Enjoy Cannes.
I will enjoy it.
Leave your diamonds behind.
Posted. Oh, don't worry, I will.
Yeah, all right, Stephanie, thank you. Cheers.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Stephanie Tetchy, there with all the entertainment news.
Yes, after the break, we'll be staying with the sort of showbiz theme, but at the more serious side, I suppose, if you will, the Wagatha Christie case ongoing in court. Colleen Rooney's preparing to take the stand again today, and her friend Lizzie Cundy is going to be joining us in the studio after this quick break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Breakfast. It is at 9:21. We're going to talk about the ongoing libel case between Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy. Now it continues today.
We're joined in the studio by Lizzie Cundy, who knows both Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy, and has joined us to give us a little bit of an insight into what's been going on. I mean, you're very well connected in the football world as well, a former wag, if you forgive the awful phrase.
Listen, I didn't create that term, the papers did. And I remember when I was there in Baden-Baden when the wags first came about, and it was like the Beatles had come to town. They were on every front page of every newspaper. But that term, some of them love it, some of them loathe it, some of them make a career out of it, like myself. And it served me well.
Do women footballers have habs, husbands and boyfriends?
Oh. Well, I don't at the minute because I got divorced, but yes, I do.
I like
but yeah, it is a term that some of the girls like. But as I said, some have made a living out of, including Rebecca Vardy, that starred in I'm a Celebrity and Dancing on Ice.
Yeah, OK, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Colleen, well, both of the ladies, you know, I suppose it's fair to say Colleen is your friend.
Well, Colleen I've known, as I said, since 2006. Rebecca I've been on a few nights out with. Actually, the picture that keeps being used is my photograph of her with her PR agent, Caroline, what was at the NTA.
Yeah.
So I probably owed some money for that picture. But, I know Colleen far better. Rebecca more of an acquaintance.
And how is Colleen doing? Because I know you were in touch with her last night.
Yeah,
what's her mood?
Well, Colleen actually, you know, I'm going to say this straight, she never wanted to go to court. She tried 3 times to stop this. Since this first came about, look what's happened in the world. There's been the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, we've got the terrible, you know, cost of living at the minute. So much has gone on. And Colleen actually said, look, this is a time of a waste of energy, waste of money, and the only winners are going to be the lawyers. So Colleen has really tried to sort of sort this before it's got to this stage, but Rebecca wanted a day in court.
Lizzie, what has been your thoughts on it? Because it seems as well, what I've read from Colleen, what she said, it's like there's this mistrust now among the wags since this situation has come to the public's attention. So what has your thoughts been on it?
Well, it's really sad, to be honest, because it has split the football community in half, because some are obviously siding with Colleen and Wayne and feel sorry for her, and others are saying, well, look, Rebecca should be, you know, she's saying she's innocent of this. But the fact is, you know, in court, sadly, a lot of her evidence is at the bottom of the North Sea.
Yes.
And she's, you know, looking to blame her PR agent, Caroline Watt, who's too fragile to be in court. And I do think Colleen has been very strong throughout. She's had Wayne by, you know, her side, and he's actually standing you know, up there today to talk himself, to say he had no idea that Colleen was doing this Wagatha Christie, you know, sort of sting operation. I mean, none of us knew it. I was on that private Instagram of Colleen's, and the way she did it was actually genius. And in her mind, and I know Colleen for a long time, she's an honest, innocent, you know, really good mother as well. She 100% sure it's Rebecca Vardy.
Yeah, and look, Rebecca Vardy, a mother, she's got 4 children as well. We all know how upset she was because a lot of this came to light when she was pregnant with her last child. And there's no winners. I mean, that's presumably why Colleen didn't want it to go to court, but airing your dirty laundry in public and putting the spotlight on all of the misbehaviours of Wayne Rooney over the years again. It's been quite nice to see them shoulder to shoulder throughout all of this.
And we've seen Colleen and Wayne, they've had their ups and downs. He's been on the front of the papers instead of the back. But they did that amazing documentary on Amazon, which, you know, he's just one of our greatest footballers. But they have had their hardships. But he's showing real support for her. And you have to imagine for Colleen why she did that post. Stories, time and time again, for years going out there. She had to get to the bottom of it because it was awful for her whole family. It had a knock-on effect. But sadly, court is awful. It's a nasty place to be.
Do you think they will ever be friends again after this, depending on the verdict?
I'm going to be honest with you. They were never great friends to start with. Colleen really did believe that Rebecca would try and be friends to get in the limelight. Look, they're two family girls, but two very different characters. You have, Rebecca that has courted the limelight, let's say, and loves doing the shows like I'm a Celebrity, Dancing on Ice, whereas Colleen, it was kind of forced upon her. She's been with Wayne since the age of 16, and she's learnt to live with the fame. But, we've heard her truth, and I think she's done very well in court. It's very sad, though, it's come to this. And as I said, I don't think anyone's really going to win, just the lawyers.
Lizzie, Stephanie, thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, and thank you to you at home for watching and being a part of the programme today.
Lizzie, we're very sad to miss Eamonn, but the viewers and the listeners will be pleased to know Eamonn will be back tomorrow from 6 o'clock. But for today, have a lovely day. Thank you for your company, Paul. Up next, Tom Harwood will be here with the briefing. See you tomorrow.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Pretty warm one for some of us today, likely to be the warmest day of the year so far. Across parts of eastern England, 26, maybe 27 degrees Celsius. Further west, things are not so straightforward. Low pressure is here and this weather front is slowly trickling in. That's going to bring some clouds and some outbreaks of rain at times to Northern Ireland, westernmost fringes of Wales, and later on today, western Scotland and the far southwest of England. Quite misty and murky around the coast of northeast Scotland, and again here it's going to suppress the temperatures, but for many places it's dry and fine, hazy sunshine, and it is warm out there as well. Temperatures ticking up steadily through the day, so across the Midlands to eastern England, 23 in Hull and Birmingham, 26 in London, maybe 27 in one or two locations, whereas Belfast 15 or 16 with the cloud and the rain moving in here, which could be quite heavy this evening across western areas at the